Hello everyone, and welcome to the Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, September 15th, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong news recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we're going to go to Open Source Summit, where Alan sat down with Derek Townsend, Vice President of Marketing at Legit Security, to talk about the company as well as discuss software supply chain security. Also at Open Source Summit, Alan talked with David A. Wheeler, Director of Open Source Supply Chain Security at the Linux Foundation, about software supply chain security, DevOps, and the concept of software factories. Then Natan meets with Arvind Nithrakashap, co-founder and CTO at Rubrik, to talk about the impact customer experience can have on the efficacy of cybersecurity. We're then joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on to tell us more about some of the upcoming webinars we have. Next up, we are airing the episode 1 of the new series, Engineering the Change. This series will follow the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding bootcamp and prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. Then we go over to Mitch, where he will meet with Tim Johnson, Director of Product Marketing at CloudBees, to talk about how organizations are challenged to meet security requirements and regulatory compliance at the accelerated pace software is being created through DevOps. He also outlines how to engage with the software and DevOps communities at DevOps World. Mitch will then speak with Lee Atchison, cloud architect expert and owner of Atchison Technologies, where they will discuss transitioning to DevOps and cloud-native applications. Then, to wrap up this broadcast, we will finish with 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first, Mike interviews Opaque Systems co-founder and CEO, Rishab Padar, as he explains how confidential computing will improve data security. Mike will then interview Divya Wadhwani, Director of Education Programs for Harness, as she explains why DevOps certifications are a good thing to have. And that's what we have coming up for you in this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy. Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for September 15th. First up, Twitter's former security chief told Congress that there was at least one agent from both China and India that potentially gave those nations access to sensitive data about its users. This is just one of the many bombshell revelations from Peter Zatko in a recent congressional hearing. Zatko talked with high confidence about foreign agents from both countries making its way into Twitter. Zatko also made claims about how Twitter ignored its engineers' concerns over security and that the platform being plagued by weak cyber defense. Zatko originally filed a whistleblower complaint back in July, claiming that Twitter violated the terms of a 2011 FTC settlement. This being said, though, Zatko did not bring extensive internal documents to back up the claims he made at this hearing. Next, a European Union court rejected Google's appeal against a $4 billion antitrust fine. The EU's Executive Commission originally gave the fine back in 2018 for throttling competition and reducing consumer choice through its control of the Android operating system. Google required smartphones to take a bundle of Google apps and prevented selling altered versions of Android operating systems. Google has argued that Android results in low-cost phones and drives competition with Apple, so it has a reason for doing so. This fine is just one of the 3 that has been given to Google in the past couple of years by the EU as it pushes to rein in big tech. Google has one more chance to appeal this decision, though, through the EU Court of Justice, but it hasn't decided yet whether it would do so or not. In other news, California has signed a bill into law that will require social media companies to publish their policies for removing disturbing content. Additionally, social media companies would have to give details on how and when they remove that content. According to the law, disturbing content would include hate speech and disinformation. The law's opponents have stated that this would disclose sensitive information of the companies, but the bill advanced with bipartisan support. This would be one of the strongest transparency requirements for companies to disclose how much they remove content to date. Next up, Uber and one of its subsidiaries paid $100 million in past due taxes to New Jersey after an audit by the state's Department of Labor and Workforce Development showed that Uber classified its workers as independent contractors. Workers that are classified as independent contractors don't receive unemployment, disability, and family leave insurance, and the companies don't have to pay for these taxes. In spite of this payment, Uber has still stated that it views drivers as independent contractors. This is just the most recent development, as the gig economy has been fighting tooth and nail in courts to classify workers as independent contractors in the past couple of years. So we'll have to see how this pans out. Next, a new research report published on Wednesday showed that 1 out of 5 videos suggested by TikTok contained misinformation. The large amount of misinformation is troubling, as TikTok has a very large young audience and is the second most popular domain in the world, only behind Google. TikTok released a statement saying that its guidelines prohibit harmful misinformation and has taken steps to direct users to trustworthy services. TikTok also stated that it removed 102 million videos that violated its rules in the first quarter of 2022, but only a small percentage of them were due to misinformation. TikTok's rise in popularity has gotten the attention of government officials who are concerned about data privacy, security, and now it seems misinformation too. On Digital CXO, we have an article looking at how it is imperative that companies develop effective digital employee experience strategies. Many companies are experiencing digital friction from the adoption of remote and hybrid work models, and the traditional methods to combat this have been proved to be less than successful. An effective digital employee experience strategy needs all parts of the company to work together. To learn more, go to digitalcxo.com. On Security Boulevard, we have an article about how JumpCloud Inc. recently launched a new password manager that stores encrypted credentials locally on users' devices and then synchronizes vaults between devices. JumpCloud has stated that this approach is more efficient and gets rid of the need for users to remember master passwords. As more and more cyber criminals have been targeting master passwords recently from password managers, this acts as a more secure approach. To learn more about JumpCloud's new password manager, go to securityboulevard.com. Finally, on DevOps.com, we have an article looking at a recent survey by New Relic that unearths observability changes. The survey polled 1,614 practitioners and IT decision makers. And among its findings, only 27% of respondents had achieved full stack observability, and that 33% still detect outages manually. To learn more about the findings of the survey, go to devops.com. And that's all we have for today's Techstrong News Recap.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
All right, everyone. We're back here continuing our coverage from the Open Source Security Summit in Austin. Our next guest is Derek Townsend.
Townsend. Like
Pete Townsend. Derek's with Legit Security. Too legit to quit. We've actually covered Legit Security on Techstrong TV before, but they are an exhibitor here, and we didn't really talk about it. We're on the second floor here at the JW Marriott. I believe it's the
it's up on the fourth floor.
Fourth floor, there's the sponsors exhibit area. There's a large exhibit area. Legit is one of the exhibitors there, but on top of that, they're also a member of the Open Source Security Foundation, OSSF, and We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about supply chain, some other stuff. But anyway, Derek, welcome. Thanks for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
You know what I'd like to get out of the way, though, and I didn't mention it to you when we first started, which is, look, not everyone out here knows legit security. I said, we've covered them before, but not everyone watched that either. So why don't we start there, man? Let's give them a little legit background and a little bit of your background.
Sure. So just background on the company. So Legit Security is headquartered in Tel Aviv, but almost all of our sales and marketing activity right now is in North America. So we're selling to larger enterprises, and it's a software supply chain security solution. I think the interesting thing is it's a really popular space right now. So there's a lot of vendors talking about software supply chain security. So when you even say that now, you kind of have to define what that means to you.
Well, not only, and we're going to define that in a minute, but not only that. I mean, when was Legit founded? Do you know?
Yes, it was back in 2019. So it was just prior to SolarWinds.
Right. Sometimes I've learned this lesson in business. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. And man, what a good time to get into software supply chain security, right? The whole world's blown up since then. Let's talk a little bit about you, though. What's your background?
Oh, I've been doing software startups for quite some time. Bounced around in different areas, developer tools, cloud management solutions, identity management, which got me into cyber, and now here.
Same here. I've been chasing that. Well, so Techstrong's not venture backed, so this was my blog, and it became this. But I know how that goes too. So let's talk a little software supply chain security. As we said, it's certainly a hot topic, even here, right? This is our second day here, I was going to say filming, but that's an old word. Recording and speaking with folks, broadcasting, streaming. And, that's been topic one.
Yeah.
Software supply chain security. And it was interesting. I had a conversation earlier today with one of our guests. And it's like, so this is a word that's come into vogue, let's say, in the last 2 years, right? Maybe since SolarWinds. Right. But really, what we talk about when we say software supply chain security goes back a lot longer than 2 years, right? We've always been worried. I mean, look, I remember selling security in the federal government space years and years ago, 15 years ago. And they were worried about backdoors and about what was embedded in the software they were installing back then. We just didn't call it supply chain security.
Right.
What's Legit's take on this?
Well, I think a lot has transpired with DevOps that has made software supply chain security a more urgent problem and a much broader attack surface. I think, rewind the clock years ago, there was always a risk of insider attack. There was always a risk of some open source libraries potentially causing a vulnerability. But now when you look at DevOps and what's happened across the SDLC, all the different tools, all the different developers and collaborators that get involved, all those moving parts have gotten much more complicated. And although cloud security and other aspects of code scanning technologies are getting more mature, looking at the SDLC and all of its complexity and all of its moving parts has not caught up. And SolarWinds was the wake-up call, and it wasn't the only one.
No.
Several after that. And now that's why you're seeing this rush into the space.
Yeah. So I don't disagree, but I would add to it in this way. When we look at what DevOps is about, right, and there's no official definition and all that, but certainly it was a big dose of agile and a pinch of lean IT, right, added into that, and how we do dev and ops and the whole software development lifecycle, pipelines, all of these things. It introduced, especially from the lean heritage, from lean manufacturing and Deming and all that stuff, right? It introduced this analog of people building software the way we build stuff in assembly lines.
Yes.
On a pipeline, and it goes along the pipeline getting finished until it's delivered, until it's deployed. And so I think the very name software supply chain security comes from supply chain security,
Yeah.
right, that we
Sure.
see there. So I think that's the heritage for it, of where that analogy comes in for something that, as we both said, has been done before necessarily, but we've never had software be developed in a factory sort of mode
Yes.
that DevOps has introduced.
I think factory is a good word because factory also connotes automation.
Yep.
And the automation is there at all of these multiple steps. And it's also got this sense of kind of lean manufacturing and just-in-time assembly that takes place from multiple different sources and dependencies. And that's
Absolutely.
part of the complexity problem. And then you add on top of that, you've got different developers, different teams, contractors, other folks coming in and out. It's a very dynamic environment, and that is representative of modern kind of physical supply chains today too.
Absolutely. So let me ask another question that I've spent the last 2 days talking probably to a dozen people already about software supply chain security, S-bombs, and so forth. My fear is every single person I spoke to gave me a different story.
Yeah.
Or not a different story, but a different take on this issue. And that's okay. There's no one right way, one wrong way. The world doesn't necessarily go black-white.
Right.
There's gray. But my take is, are we going to extend it and embrace it for every single vendor out here until you Unixify it, right? Where, you have all these different flavors, but they're not really compatible.
Cyber is interesting, and you look at the evolution of different categories of cyber solutions. It takes a little bit of time for it to gel and for the boundaries to kind of
That
get
could be
defined
right where we are.
and categorized. And I think this is early days. There is no formal category defined by someone like a Gartner or a Forrester yet for what software supply chain security is. But I think what you're seeing is that when you look at the attacks, they come from a lot of different vectors, and there's a lot of lateral movement, and so someone can claim a kind of a more narrow scope solution to software supply chain security. It's not exactly wrong. It could be one attack vector, but when we think about it, we think that what the market needs is something more holistic that looks across everything from when the developer submits the code, it goes through the build server, you go through the artifact repo, and it gets just ready to go into production. That to us is the scope of the software supply chain. So it's the pipeline, it's the systems and infrastructure in that pipeline, it's the developers and the collaborators that are interacting in it, and it's also the code that's passing through it. But where we draw the line internally is that we're not a code scanning tool. We're not SAST. We're not SCA. Those are well-defined categories. Lots of vendors in it, mature tech. We're not trying to recreate that wheel. But there are some other pieces of code security like secret scanning and scanning infrastructure as a code that still have space and we think are still part of that integral solution. But our take is don't try to replace them. But there's value in finding where they are positioned across the software supply chain. So sometimes, your SAA tool got turned off, or sometimes you don't have SAS scanning on a product line you should. And just getting visibility into that is really important. And the other thing that we're finding, this is at the intersection of dev and security, DevSecOps. Development teams might know some of this, kind of the back of the envelope or back of their hand. They know where these tools are. The security folks don't necessarily. And so it starts in our mind getting visibility into that whole pipeline, that whole SDLC first, including knowing where the other security controls are. And now you can start taking action. Now you can start doing important things to tighten up your security posture.
Love it. I want to talk a little OSSF participation. So Legit's a corporate member of the OSSF, along with some of the, the biggest names. IBM, Microsoft, Google, big tech. what do you guys like? What's your, and I don't mean you personally, but
Sure.
what do you see as the role of legit security in this kind of organization?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that really comes from our founders that were part of the IDF and have seen these things in the real world. And they want to, truly kind of help out the broader community, not just our customers. And that's in a couple different ways. One is the research that we have. So we have an actual security research team within Legit. We're actively looking for vulnerabilities and publishing them, doing responsible disclosure. We had one 2 months ago. We have another one coming out later this month. So part of it is finding those vulnerabilities and sharing them before they get out of control. But the other one that's probably going to be even more impactful is the open source tools that we're going to contribute. So I mentioned earlier, our platform does this automated discovery across this whole pipeline, so you get to see what's out there. We're going to carve off small pieces of that capability. For example, looking at your GitHub instances. Is it properly configured? Has a developer taken a private repo and made it public, which they shouldn't do? That sort of security posture management for a GitHub repo is something that we're now actively working at to provide to the open source community as a tool that folks can use on their own to improve their own software supply chain security for that piece. Now, if they find that useful, they might find legit security, and they might find out that we do not just that, but all the other repos, all the other build servers, all the other artifact repos, and everything else. So it could be an entry point to that. But in the meantime, it definitely helps the community at large.
Love it. Absolutely. Yesterday was, I forgot what they call it, but like affiliate day or whatever. And the OpenSSF had their kind of event. Not to say that, it's very embedded into everything going on this week. But I'm wondering if you were involved in that at all, what your impressions were from what you've seen so far.
I wasn't involved in the event, but I think the open source community as a whole has a really important role in just the topic of software supply chain security. And part of it is SCA tools and just the vulnerabilities that can be introduced through open source libraries consumed in software. That in and of itself is a huge deal. You talk to some people and they'll tell you commercial software today is composed anywhere from up to 80% or even more of open source libraries. That's not going to change.
No.
So continuing to focus on that and bring more attention to that space is really important. And then I think it takes you in other important areas about all the other dependencies associated with building software today. SBOMs are part of that, which is picking up momentum.
You think so?
Yeah, and there's other things. It's not just open source libraries. There's other dependencies across the board. So the more people talk about it, the more people start to put their attention to how this is being managed, and it's not a mystery anymore, and people are looking at ways to secure it. I think is better for everyone.
I don't disagree with you at all. Hey, you know what we didn't tell people? If they want to get information on legit security, LEGIT?
Yeah, legitsecurity.com.
Okay.
Come check out a demo.
Yeah.
You can go to the website. There's a book a demo button. We've found that like a lot of these vendors, they'll talk about software supply chain security. When you see the product work, then the light bulbs really go off. And that's not unlike us. So go check out a demo.
Excellent. Hey, man, Derek, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Enjoy the rest of the week here at Open Source Summit. Check out Legit Security. They're a member of OpenSSF. We're live here in Austin. We'll be back in a moment with another guest.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, we're back. I hope you can hear me. My microphone's a little messed up here, but in fixing it, they mangled it. But anyway, we're live in Austin at the Linux Foundation Open Source Security Summit. I am joined by David A. Wheeler, not to be confused with any of the other many David Wheelers out there. But David, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So, well, I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. I've given them your name, but tell our audience who's David A. Wheeler.
Okay, well, many ways to answer that one, but I guess what you're probably looking for.
It's a family show.
Okay, fair enough. So I work for the Linux Foundation, and my title tells me that I'm the Director of Open Source Supply Chain Security. And what the heck does that mean? Quickly, I'm a subject matter expert. I go around to the various foundations within the Linux Foundation, and really in some cases with other foundations and projects as well, trying to help improve the security of open source software, which we all depend on all around the world.
Got it.
And I should say, soup to nuts, anywhere from it's in the developer's head, getting into version control, built, turned into a package, just all the way to operations.
Absolutely. So look, as I was kidding around before we went live, we've had no shortage of open source security, not open source security, supply chain security discussions in the last 2 days. It is the top of the line here. And quite frankly, we were at RSA conference 2 weeks ago doing similar interviews on Broadcast Alley, and software supply chain security was top of mind there as well.
Sensibly so.
Yeah, I put on the Mark Miller and I put on the DevSecOps event every year at RSA at Moscone, and not surprisingly, supply chain security was top there. Just ran in on my way before sitting back down here to the men's room. I ran into Alan Friedman.
Yes, he's here.
He's the S-bomb man,
Mr.
right?
S-bomb, yes.
Mr.
Indeed.
S-bomb. And so all good. It's certainly a very relevant topic. So I got to ask you an honest question. How long have you had this title?
I only joined the Linux Foundation in 2020, April 2020.
And have you been supply chain security?
That's been my title since I joined.
In 2020. Was
Absolutely.
it after SolarWinds?
No, that was before SolarWinds. In fact, I wrote an essay about SolarWinds as a Linux Foundation employee.
Well, that was pretty pre-essent then.
Well, you know what? I realize some people are surprised and, where's the supply chain coming from? But, all you have to do is look at some of the numbers. There are several studies that look at just open source, and they're finding anywhere from 70 to 90% of the components within an application are actually open source.
Right.
That's not including any proprietary software they're reusing. So I've been around the software industry for a while. There was a time when software was pretty much, you developed the entire application from scratch all by itself. That's right. And the big concern then was, how do we enable reuse? How can we make it so that we don't have to rewrite? Write something once and reuse it. And the good news is we have solved that problem. But
bad news is
the bad news is fundamentally is that the causes of today's problems are often yesterday's solutions.
Yeah.
And so that's very much so. What we're seeing is we have now mostly solved the reuse problem. But now we have to deal with because software is mostly other software, we now need to deal with that other software as a potential source of defects in general, including security problems.
So, David, I've been in security almost 25 years, and I have been in tech 30 years. I started DevOps.com, right, back in 2014. One of the reasons was because I thought it was a great thing for security. But I will say that supply chain security, software supply chain security, we wouldn't have that had it not been for DevOps. Because I think we've always had, and I'll explain to you what I mean so you don't think.
Okay, okay, go on.
I think we've always had to worry about what is the security posture of any components or scripts or artifacts or whatever we're using in our software. But one of the great contributions to software and the way we do technology today that DevOps has made has been the introduction of sort of lean IT, lean manufacturing concepts into building software. And it's not the only thing, but it's resulted one of the things that has contributed towards resulting in this idea of a software factory. Right? We didn't think of software factories before, even though.
Oh, yes, we did.
there
The
might have
University of
been-
Maryland had such programs, I think, in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that concept's been around for a while.
But
Certainly
that
the phrase.
wasn't commercial.
No.
Like when we talked about people developing software, it was very much a custom.
Right.
Developers, they started with I'll never forget, one of the first companies I started, we go in to meet with Time Warner, and they wanted it was a customer service app for their cable customers or something like that. And they said, well, they asked my partner, well, what IDE do you use? What IDE do you use? What,
Sure.
all the people, this one used Borland, this one used the semantic one. And my partner, who was a stone cold coder, said, well, I use VI. And he developed in VI. So everybody in those days, I mean, that's how software was done. Now, today, we really do, for the first time on a commercially scalable scale, have this concept of software factories where software moves along a pipeline,
Right.
right?
Right. I mean, the whole idea of a CI pipeline isn't really new. It's just finally it's become widely adopted.
Right.
Now, I would
That's
argue
the-
that's not the problem. That's part of a solution. The supply chain problem, I would argue, fundamentally comes down to you've got all these reused components that enables you to not have to rebuild everything from scratch, but now you're dependent on all those tiers and all those the software that it depends on and the software that depends on and so on. But things like CI pipelines can help us address.
But again, let's go back to the
challenge.
factory piece.
Yes.
What made that assembly line work is the Model T. Every gear shift on the Model T was the same ball with the same threads. So I could sit here and just screw balls on stick shifts all day, right?
Yeah.
And that's how an assembly line in factory worked. It wasn't, whether it was third-party products that we're putting in cars or building appliances or whatever you build on your pipeline assembly
Right.
line. You can't have too much customization if you're going to do that at scale. You had to have that.
You had to agree on some things, but you also have to make sure you agree on the right things. So, for
Yeah.
example, I think in vast numbers, you mentioned IDEs. I think nowadays, we don't care what IDE you use.
No one cares.
Why care?
That
What we
was a
care
long.
about-
Well, Borland's not here anymore, but that's all.
That's a different, yeah. But basically focusing on figure out what matters. That's always an easier thing to see after the fact. It's much harder to figure it out when you're in the midst of the problem. And then, okay, this is the part we need to agree on. And I'm coming back to the CI pipelines. After I make a proposed change, making it go through stages and doing automated tests, running various kinds of scanners to look for various kinds of potential problems, so that by the time you bring it in, you have very high confidence
Of
that
what
the
it is.
result is going to be better than what you had before.
Yep. But so there was an argument. I forgot what presidential election it was already, but cars made in America. And cars assembled in America.
Yes, which
but
is
parts-
different.
Right. Parts made in Mexico or
Right.
wherever.
Sure.
Today, I think our software is like that.
Oh,
It
absolutely.
may be assembled by any software, whoever vendor is doing that. But the parts are made all over the place.
It's frankly, in many ways, even more than the rest of the physical world, because at least in the physical world, there's a cost of physical movement,
Right.
Whereas the bits are essentially free to copy around.
Exactly.
And so yes, the world of software development is internationalized. It has been for a while. It's just that some policymakers haven't noticed.
Yeah, no, but but the other thing that's given rise to is the repos. And I don't mean repo cards, right?
Yes.
I mean the repositories of
Right.
these
We're
software.
talking about GitHub and GitLab and
The-
those kinds of facilities. Yes.
Well, GitHub certainly, but Git in general. The
Okay,
whole
we give the version
concept
control system. Yes.
of
Yes.
we are storing reusable code, and in some cases, like you look at the Docker
Right.
repos, and you look at an Artifactory or the Nessus ones from Suntech. We are storing reusable components that you could be sitting, whether you're sitting here with me or in Ukraine, right? You could pull it down and assemble, right? And that's power. Look, it's been an igniter for all kinds of software development. It's also been a security, and it's been a bit of a security issue because now we're pulling down. What version are you pulling down?
Right. And are you updating because there's a vulnerability found in that version? Are you keeping things up to date?
So, I think we both agree on that. Here's my take. I always thought that the choke point, if we can use that word, would be at those repos, because that's where people are getting these reusable components. Why wouldn't a repo have a toll gate or an SBOM checker or something, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
that says, oh, wait, David, you're pulling down the old version of this.
Yep.
You need the new version.
To be fair, people are actually working on those sorts of things. The OpenSSF has something called package analysis.
Yes, I actually just spoke to
Oh, okay.
Caleb about it.
Great. So, there are some efforts to do that. And I think in many cases, not so much the repo as the package manager, making it easy to say, hey, wait a minute, that's a vulnerable version, please update. There is, and by the way, the OpenSSF has a number of working groups, and the newest one is specifically for the folks who manage repositories.
I think that's where we got to be.
Yeah, and the package repositories and the package managers, and they're just starting, but already I think there's great promise. The challenge that they have is scale, though. In particular, a lot of people, why don't you just detect all malicious software?
Good luck.
Wow. There are tools we can use to detect them in some cases. Can that be helpful? Yes. That better not be your only mechanism that exists.
No.
And frankly, one of the biggest problems now, because most software is actually the software you bring in, one of the biggest problems now is old, out-of-date software that's known to be vulnerable, that needs to be updated.
That's already out there, by the way.
Oh, yeah. And the good news is that there are tools to help you identify, tools to help you update, but people have to basically...
Probably need to automate it.
And in fact, a lot of the automation's there.
A lesson I learned in security, too, over the last 25 years, people talk automation, they get scared when it comes time to automate, because they're afraid they're going to break something else by doing it automatically.
This is where the CI pipelines come in.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, I tell people... there's some really excellent academic research about software testing and that sort of thing. But you know what? You can make this much simpler. How you need automated tests. How many tests do you need? You need enough tests to be confident that what you release is going to be okay to use. If your automated tests aren't good enough, then if your automated tests can't do that, then they're not good enough.
You got a problem.
You got a problem. Once your automated tests are good enough, now you can do things like fearlessly upgrade to a newer package because I ran my tests. Everything works.
Yeah, but what about the dependency of that software on other software?
Same thing. As those get updated, you immediately notice does it work or not.
Right.
And so this combination, basically CI pipelines, including automated tests, various tools to analyze the software, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for issues. It's very simple. It's not complex, but it's powerful.
Yeah, it is. No doubt about it. I had something and I went right out of my mind. It's terrible getting old. But, back to this whole concept of that with software supply chain. Look, Mark Miller was at Sonatype, right? When Struts 2, was it Equifax, right? Came out. And what was an interesting thing is him and Derek Weeks, who was at Sonatype at the time, they did a survey and some research like 6 to 8 months after Equifax.
Yeah.
So everyone who was top of the news charts.
Right.
People are still downloading and using the old version of Struts 2 in their packages instead of the new version.
Right. And there's been a lot of discussion about how do you deal with that. You don't want to break somebody's system, and yet this is a real problem for a lot of folks. So There are various discussions about how to deal with this, anywhere from maybe slowing down those bad downloads, so to give a hint without really breaking someone's system. But there's various ideas, but it's a real issue. Right now, I think the goal is to just try to make it easier and easier to do the right thing. We want to try to make the default the right thing. And then if we truly, for the true stragglers, we're going to need to find other approaches. But let's make it really easy to do.
You got to use a little carrot and a little stick is what I'm hearing.
In some sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you can call making it easy a carrot. But I think fundamentally, generally, people do what is the easy thing to do. So we make the right thing the easy. That's right. We make the right thing the easy thing. We don't have to worry so much about the sticks.
Yep. All right. So, David, we've set the table. We used our whole 15 minutes, but we've set the table. Let me go now to the next part. You're the first person we've had on from around open source security that actually is a Linux Foundation employee.
Uh-oh.
So I got to ask you the question, beyond giving the OpenSSF a home, right? You were doing this before there was OpenSSF.
Yes.
What is the role of the Linux Foundation in your mind in making open source software more secure?
Well, actually, let me step back further, because there's the question of what is the purpose of the Linux Foundation.
Yeah, absolutely.
We put the period
Let's
right
go
there,
there, right.
and then
we'll take part
because in
two.
fact I think the security question follows.
Yep.
I mean, the fundamental goal of the Linux Foundation, and really any good open source software foundation, is to enable collaboration. There's all sorts of legal wickets that you can get in trouble with. There are many things that a project often needs beyond just, hey, I need a repo with version control. And so a lot of organizations have decided that it's a lot easier to get things done, to get collaboration done, if they can create a project within a foundation. There are some organizations that create foundations specifically for a particular project. I mean, the Python Software Foundation, it's focused on Python.
Absolutely.
And there's many other foundations. The Linux Foundation is basically a foundation that creates foundations. So we create foundations to quickly get going. And why do we create foundations, and more specifically, why create projects? And the answer is to solve a problem.
Yep.
So that's the general. Now, the more specific, what about security? Same kind of thing. We need to make things more secure, and specifically open source software more secure. How do we do that? We want to do collaboration because it's too hard for any one organization to do it themselves. That makes sense for the Linux Foundation to do, because as soon as you say we want to enable collaboration to solve a problem, that's what the Linux Foundation is for. And really, I would say any foundation. I mean, I work for the Linux Foundation. I like them.
It's good you do.
It's good I do, I guess.
Yeah.
But it really, I work for the Linux Foundation, but that should be the job of any foundation, is trying to help enable collaboration in terms of the Open Source Software Foundation. And in this particular issue, though, the Linux Foundation is one of the largest, maybe the largest open source software foundation, and it just kind of made sense for the many, many, many people that have to deal with security, because this is truly an industry-wide issue. So it made sense to put this in the Linux Foundation to work on industry-wide solutions.
I love it. Hey, man, we're over time.
Okay. Can I make a couple of quick points?
Go.
All right. So I just, before we head off, I would love to encourage anybody who sees this thing.
Talk to them.
Talk to them. Okay. Hello, them.
Okay.
So if you develop open source software, I would love for you to take advantage of some of the stuff that we've already developed within the Linux Foundation, and especially the OpenSSF. So there's a free course on how to develop secure software. If you haven't taken a course, take that course. We have all sorts of guidance on best practices on how to develop secure software more securely. Best practices badge. There's a scorecards to evaluate projects. There's something called Salsa to help identify some key requirements for the supply chain and build. And so we've got some good stuff. Take a look. I think your users will be grateful.
Absolutely. Anything else?
I'm sure there is, but we're out of time.
All right. Hey, look, you're invited back anytime you want.
Thank you.
David A. Wheeler, Linux Foundation, Open Source Software Supply Chain Security Director. I got a little out of order, but I think I got all the words in there. We're live here in Austin. We'll be back in a minute with our next guest. Thanks.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
So hi, everyone. Today we're here with Arvind Nithrakashyap, goes by Nitro. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Great. So Nitro is the CTO of Rubrik. How are you doing today, Arvind?
I'm doing good, and thank you so much for having me on this program.
Of course. So for people that might not know who you are, could you maybe provide some background on your experience in this industry and how you've gotten to where you are now?
Absolutely. I actually started my career at Oracle as a software engineer there, working on the core database product. In fact, Bipul was my co-founder and CEO, and I used to work together at Oracle. So we know each other for more than 20 years. Did a bunch of stuff there, as well as launched the Accelerator product, which is a storage platform specifically focused on the database use case. There were three of us who started that project, and then was there until we released the first version. And then after that, I've mostly worked in small startups, and most recently, before Rubrik, was at a online advertising startup called Rocket Fuel, which was really about doing real-time ad buying for display ads through various exchanges. Spent about 4 years there, and that's when Bipul and I reconnected, and then we started exploring this space. And the more we looked at it, it felt like there hadn't been much disruption in a long time, and that the world had changed, but a lot of people are stuck with very old technologies. And so we felt there was an opportunity to come and do something very different and change the game there. And that's how we got started, pulled in a couple of other co-founders and started Rubrik in 2014.
That's amazing. And so for people that might not know exactly what you guys have going on at Rubrik, could you dive into that and your role with the company?
Absolutely. So at Rubrik, we are 100% focused on providing data security to our customers, right? So today we have 4,500 plus customers that we partner with. The company has been around now. We are actually eight plus years. We started in 2014.
Wow.
And we're about 2,500 plus employees. What we mean by data security is really about, as you probably know, in the last few years, the number of attacks that have been happening across enterprises has only risen, right? And very often when you think of security, companies are mostly looked at infrastructure security. How do you secure the firewall? How do you make sure that the security posture in terms of credentials, accounts, and all of that are managed well, right? And all of that is great. I mean, it protects you from the perimeter, make sure that none of the malicious actors get into your assets. But then when that 1 in 10,000, breakage happens, the core asset that all of them are after is your data. And today, for every enterprise, their business runs on the ability to be able to access the data, whether it's customer information or internal information, IP, whatever it is. And what the attackers are targeting is, can I get to those critical assets and either make them inaccessible, or worse, even exfiltrate them and threaten to release them into the public domain and extract a ransom in exchange, right? And this is something that has only escalated. And the interesting thing about this is that it has become almost it's become almost like a business model where these malicious actors are able to go and sit in something, maybe even in a foreign country, and attack enterprises and actually extract a ransom. And it's almost a safer way to do crime than doing anything in the physical world today.
Yeah,
so this has been on the increase, and even through the pandemic, we've seen today. I would say that there are, in any given week, there are 1 or 2 customers that are are going through a ransomware remediation process, and we are helping them through the process. So this is happening every week. There's some customer we are helping through this process. So it's all over. It's happening very, very frequently.
Right. And like as cybersecurity advances, so does ransomware and the way that people are conducting attacks. So it just seems like you guys would like to stay one step ahead always, right? And
yeah, I think, and especially with with the pandemic, there's this explosion in virtual work. It is much more of a distributed workforce today than it was even 2 years ago, right? So people are taking their laptops everywhere. They are working remotely, and what happens is just increase the surface area of attack, right? And very often, a very common way in which the malicious actors get in is through credential stealing, right? It could be a phishing attack. It could be, you're on a network that's not as secure because you're working remotely. It's no longer, while in the past you could say everybody comes in the office and I really secure my office. It's no longer the office. It's no longer a constrained area. It's distributed globally, right? So because of that, the odds that there is some kind of a breach just increases. And while absolutely you should focus on the infrastructure security and do everything to secure that, you also have to always think about what happens if there is a breach. How do I protect the core assets on which are critical for my business? And how do I make sure that, if, God forbid, if something like this happens, how do I quickly remediate and get my business back up and running? And that's what we are focused on. So it's complementary to everything else you see in the security landscape. But I think this is a missing dimension that we are focused on and really want to help our customers.
Right. It's integral also because the more people that are online, the more potential targets there are. So these cyber criminals are just casting a wide net, and they're going to catch something, right?
Absolutely.
And so speaking on cybersecurity, and especially a hot topic is the impact customer experiences can have on the efficacy of cybersecurity. So any thoughts on the importance of this within this industry?
Yeah, I think what's happening is, again, if you go back over the last 10 years, right, we talked about data being the critical asset for your business. The problem is that critical asset is not, safely guarded in a locker. It's exploded because businesses have, today many of them are the enterprise, but they're moving to the cloud. They're using SaaS applications. Some organizations use hundreds of SaaS applications on a daily basis, right? And this is how they make their workforce productive, make sure their customers are getting the right kind of experience that they should. So what's happening is there's a proliferation of data in multiple forms and form factors across your organization. So it's beyond kind of like human comprehension to just go and diligently go and safeguard all of these, right? So what happens is you have to really focus on making this simple for the practitioners, whether it's the CISO, the security organization, or the IT organization. They're being bombarded by information from different sources. How do they kind of separate the signal from the noise and focus on the true threats and make sure they're mitigating that? So customer experience is becoming even more important today because of when I say customer experience, I'm saying in the normal runtime, can you make sure that your data is resilient, right? If something happens, how do I make sure that all my critical applications, all my critical databases are protected? So that's one piece. Then there's a lot of activity that's going on within the organization. One key observation that we have heard from many security experts is that it's not that the attacker comes in and there's a breach and they immediately goes and does something. Very often these malicious pieces of software lie dormant for a long period of time, and then they look for the right moment to attack, the right asset to attack. So what you have to do is you have to constantly keep scanning your internal ecosystem to detect such things and see if there's some action to be taken. But again, if I give you 1,000 alerts every day, it's not humanly possible to beat.
So visibility has to be.
You have to really call out the 5 things that you should look at and make sure that you're separating the signal from the noise. And again, that's part of the customer experience, right? In the sense that you've got to make sure that it's simple and easy for people to target the key things they should do. And then the last piece is, God forbid, if there's an attack, it's probably the most stressful day for any of the operators trying to remediate that attack, right? At that point, you don't have the mental bandwidth to go and think on the fly. What you want is a very easy, time-tested way that you can remediate, recover the data. And you need to be able to hopefully have done some practice runs before that you know how this operates. And it has to be a few clicks. Human error is another big factor when you do the recovery process. Human error can actually make it longer for you to recover, because you miss something and you have to go back and do the same process again. So as much as you can automate, as much as you can make it a few clicks and I can restore and do it as quickly as I can. Again, that's very critical, because you're trying to get the business back up and running. You don't have the time to check 100 boxes and make sure it's working. So it's become a very critical component of all of these three pillars we see from an overall data security perspective. And that's what we are focused on. We're focused on how can you make it easy to make it resilient? How can you provide you the right kind of observability as you go through your normal operations? And if there's any kind of an attack, how can we help you recover as quickly and as simply as possible?
So it's definitely a multifaceted approach. It's not just having visibility, it's having the right visibility and having it be efficient.
Absolutely.
And that ties into the response, right? So like if there is an attack, if the visibility isn't efficient, what are you going to do, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how can security and engineering teams become more customer oriented? And like, what would that mean for cybersecurity organizations?
Yeah, I think obviously customer feedback is important, right? So if you're trying to, for example, just this example, if you're trying to help customers remediate any kind of an attack, you obviously need to understand the process they go through. You need to understand what are their pain points. So obviously you can do this through conversations with them. For example, we have partnered with, even incident response organizations to understand the process they follow, to understand where are the bottlenecks that we can go and help alleviate. But also, I think in today's world, as we move more to a kind of a SaaS-oriented application model, we actually can get a lot of information metrics from customers as they go through this process. For example, if there's a workflow they're going through, and they click on something or they spend too much time on a screen, that's an indication to you that maybe there's some complexity in that process, right? So then it gives you the right kind of questions you can ask to the customer saying, hey, I saw you going through this workflow. I saw that this took a lot of time. And now on average, this takes much longer than the other pieces. Is there some complexity there? What is your pain point? If you don't get these very specific pointed questions, it's hard for customers to just think back and say, hey, I need you to do this, this, and this, because they are going through many such workflows during the day. So I think today, recently we announced our Rubrik Security Cloud product, and the idea is to really provide a central SaaS control plane for everything, for all of these different pieces that I talked about.
Amazing.
So from that perspective, now what we do is that if every piece of interaction that our customer does goes through our SaaS platform, we can actually get a lot more detailed metrics and really hone in on what are the points in the workflows that maybe are not providing the best user experience, and how can we make it faster and easier and simpler for our customers. So I think, historically, when we think about security, we think of like firewall, we think of backend, we think of things, we don't think of customer experience, but eventually it's a human work. Humans are involved in all these processes, and we have to make it easy for those people to step through these and make sure they can do this quickly and efficiently. So I think customer experience is becoming very important, partly because of just the scale and size of the data that they have to deal with, and also the complexity and workflows that they have to go through. So the more we can do here and more we can make it simpler for our customers, the more secure they will be. Because if it's simple for you to do a few things and be secure, then it's easy. But if I ask you to do 100 things, it's easy for you to miss.
Right.
That exposure.
It needs to be seamless for both sides. It's a two-sided issue, because you're providing efficient visibility for them, but at the same time, you need to have insight as to how to improve your processes, right? And so that's probably some of the challenge there. But on the flip side of that, what would a poor customer experience mean for a cybersecurity organization? And like, what sort of an impact can that have on utilization or efficacy?
I think the way I see it, the number one problem is, so let's say there's an attack, right? And you're trying to recover from that. If it's going to take you hours and hours to figure out how to do it, your business, I mean, your business effectively is down for that period of time, right? So the number one point is if you have poor user experience, your actual recovery time and the ability to recover will be seriously impacted, which means your business will actually be down or non-operational for a longer period of time. So that's the number one problem, right? But then the other piece is that while, obviously, hopefully attacks are not happening every day, but then it's really what you do on a daily basis that ensures that you're better protected for these. So then again, if you don't have visibility into, okay, are all my critical applications and assets protected? Am I looking at the key metrics that I need to look at to ensure that there are no lurking cyber attacks? If you don't have the visibility, again, it's going to boil down that you just miss certain things and you're just more prone to such attacks, right? So a poor user experience implies that it just, in very simply, just makes you less secure because you're not able to use the tools effectively. You're not able to use the tools efficiently, and every IT organization has hundreds of things that they're asked to do. They're constantly juggling things, right? So the easier we make it for them, the more effective they can be.
Right. And the process needs to be refined before the attack happens, because once the attack happens, it's a matter of response. You're not changing the process that got you there, visibility and all of that.
And one point is that if, for example, if some of your data, sensitive data is actually in the hands of the bad actors, then, I mean, there's not so much, they can do a lot of damage, including releasing personal information of your customers and so on, right? So it's not just about, okay, impact of the business. You could actually have impact outside of your business to your customers as well. So it becomes even more critical.
Right. And how does the damage control go for that when they get access to that critical data or secrets? How do you backtrack and make sure that you're controlling the amount of damage that happens at that point?
Yeah, so I think the key thing there is, before an attack happens, can you proactively monitor? For example, there might be sensitive information that is sitting in a particular database. And now you see that say it's financial information. Why is somebody from the HR department accessing that information? And they've never looked at it before, but suddenly they're accessing and querying all these records. So that's a trigger to say something is out of the ordinary here. Maybe there's a valid reason, but more likely there's something strange going on. So what that does is it lets you proactively go and look at this. And if you see that, oh yeah, these people should not have access to information, this is a mistake in the way we configure our permissions, and you fix that, then what you've done is you have sealed that one potential area of attack and prevented that from being compromised. So it's a lot of this is around figure out, first of all, can you figure out where your sensitive information is in this huge amount of data that you will deal with on a daily basis? And then can you make sure that only the right people have access to that sensitive data? So the more you can reduce that surface area of attack, the more secure you are.
Right. And so that ties back into ultimately your how prepared you are for an attack tells you how your damage control will go. Because
absolutely,
ultimately, if you know who has access, you're just tracking that. But if you don't know that before, you're in trouble. Right.
And most of it is because most of this happens not because of malicious actors within the organization. It's because more people have access to this information than they should, and one of them is going to get compromised. Right. Exactly.
And that ties into the holistic understanding of user perception, how that can you elaborate on how that can build the customer success in the long term opposed to short-term attacks, just longevity wise? How will having that understanding affect customers?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is you have to have a very good view in terms of what are the critical sensitive information. It could be critical IP of the company. It could be critical financial information. It could be critical personal information about customers or employees. So those, and there are new applications being created every day. There are new copies of the data being created every day because there are new use cases that are coming up. So, but as soon as such use cases is coming up, can I actually go and very quickly understand that, oh, it's not just sitting in this database. There's another copy of this data sitting in this database. It might be a valid use case, but then now I need to make sure that I'm also keeping an eye on that. So what you need is you can't go manually look for these. You need to kind of have the system kind of tell you. There has to be some kind of tool that warns you that's saying, here's some sensitive information that I've now found in this database that wasn't there yesterday. So that's precisely the kind of stuff we do, which is as we protect applications day in, day out, we say, oh, yesterday there was no sensitive information here, but today this database has some sensitive information.
Right.
So maybe we should.
How does Rubrik like productize like this increased visibility and customer experience? Like how is this offered to people?
So what we do is so when we protect the applications every day we're taking a copy of the data and storing it in our system.
Gotcha.
And once a new version of the data comes in, we actually scan through it to look for sensitive information. So we can say that, oh, this file server didn't have any sensitive information yesterday, but today there was a new file that was created that contains some credit card numbers. So then we flag that and we send a notification to our customer saying, we just found a new hit where there's a file with sensitive information sitting in this place, and there are 1,000 users who have access to this file.
Wow!
So that immediately triggers either the security ops person to go and say, okay, why is that? Is this a valid use case? Maybe it's a valid use case, but let me double check. And they'll say, oh no, somebody made a copy and just put it in the wrong place. Okay, so then let me take it out of there.
So you guys are basically in a watchtower over these organizations, right? And so you are the visibility in a way. But
yeah, so what the reason we are able to do this is we are taking copies of your data every day from a data protection perspective. We're doing this every day, right? And so we are able to use machine learning techniques to detect both anomalous changes. Hey, why did 30% of the files in this server get encrypted? Is this an attack, right? So we can warn customers. Why is here's a new file or database with sensitive information wasn't there yesterday. Is this a valid use case? And if so, then maybe you should make sure that the right permission, the right people have the access to it, and not everybody has access to it. So it's basically because and all of this could be your sensitive information is probably 1% of your data, but you can't manually sift through it. But if a system is constantly watching and bringing in, looking at the new changes and is able to analyze this and really, again, separate the signals from the noise, right? Point out the ones that you should pay attention to, right. Then you can go and take action on it.
So that's my question is, do you guys treat all attacks the same, or do you see a major critical breach and treat that differently than you would something minor? Like, do you just flag a minor attack? And like, how does that work? How's that process?
So we are 100% focused on the data, right? So what we're trying to do is we are looking at patterns in the data that might indicate either the potential for an attack or maybe just an exposure that you should not have. So this is, say, even before an attack happens. This is actually, I'm talking about before an attack happens, can we proactively keep giving the customer information? So for example, we have this, what we call a data security dashboard, which gives you kind of a score. And what that's saying is, how's your posture regarding sensitive information? Do you have a lot of sensitive information distributed across the organization with lots of people access to it? So that indicates to you that, okay, that's a problem that you should go and look at. Or are there anomalous kind of changes that are happening that usually don't happen? So every Sunday, let's say there are a bunch of files that are cleaned up in a particular server. Sunday on a Wednesday, I see that 30% of the files were cleaned up. Maybe it's a legitimate use case, but likely it's potentially an attack as well. So what we're doing is we are using machine learning techniques to separate the normal activities that happen and point out the abnormal activities that could point you to an attack. Then the customer can go and evaluate and see, is there a valid use case or is this an actual attack that happened, right? So this is the kind of what we are constantly monitoring the data, because we are bringing all the data into our platform as part of the data protection service we provide. And then we are building these services on top of that to provide insights back into our customer.
Right. And as we were saying earlier, the rise of cyber attacks, it's exponential. It must be like trying to find a needle in a haystack, considering how many attacks or things that may appear to be an attack happen on a daily basis. How do you sift through the noise? If there's so much traffic happening, how do you identify like this might develop into something that, something that might be small now, it may be develop into something that's a huge issue. How do you sift through that?
Yeah, that's where we employ some machine learning techniques to kind of learn. So once our system gets operational in a particular organization, we are monitoring the normal activities that happen. So over call it a period of 1 to 2 weeks, the system learns that, okay, these are usually normal activities. So we don't warn anything the first couple of weeks. But after the first couple of weeks, we kind of get a sense of the normal ways in which data patterns change. And then if something abnormal happens, essentially our machine learning models indicate that, okay, this looks like a potential abnormal operation. You should take a look at it. In some cases, there might be legitimate things, right? I mean, there was some one-off activities that are legitimate activities. But what that lets you do is if there are 5 such activities and 4 of them are okay, but there's one that is not, then it lets you go and probe and understand what's happening there. Maybe that is actually an indication of some kind of a cyber attack or presence of, some kind of malicious software in the organization.
And I'm sure as it sees more attacks, it gets smarter and it's understanding how things develop.
Exactly.
But so on another note, could you dive into continuous feedback loops and how this is important to teams in this industry?
Yeah. So one of the things that we should realize, I mean, we talk about ransomware like it's a specific kind of attack, but ransomware itself is constantly evolving, right?
Right.
There are different kinds of techniques that people use, and different kinds of organizations that have very different ways in which they attack. So the key thing is you can't be static in this industry. And part of it is, yes, you can learn from what's happening elsewhere, but you also have to constantly get feedback from customers on things that are working, or there might be changes in the processes within the organization that suddenly is triggering false alerts. And that's almost as bad as missing a real attack, because that increases the noise that you have to deal with. So you constantly have to keep talking to customers to understand, are the systems working as you expect? Do we need to tweak it? Do we need to tweak the models? Do we need to customize certain things for our customers? So the more you learn from your customers, and the other piece here is certain things might happen in an organization. It might also be happening in 100 other organizations, within your customer base. Again, if you can take all of this, synthesize this, and share that with the larger community, it also helps spread the knowledge within the community, and people proactively can learn from this and take more protective actions. So again, we are at this unique vantage point where we have, as I said, 4,500 plus customers. We can actually get learnings from all of them, synthesize that, and feed that back to our customer base, saying, hey, these are the kinds of attacks we're seeing. And there's a new kind of attack we have discovered at a particular customer. So you should watch out for these kinds of things. So those are also very useful for the community to kind of protect themselves against this. The thing is, this is not going away, right? We think cybercrime is only going to keep increasing, especially there are even national actors who are doing malicious things. So as we kind of, if this is going to continue to scale up, we have to constantly learn, and we have to be constantly willing to adapt to the changing threat landscape. And so this is where getting continuous feedback, understanding whether the workflows that worked yesterday, do they work today? Do we need to change them? And you have to constantly dynamically keep changing them. And also feeding back the best practices to the larger community so that everybody learns from it and can improve their best practices.
Right. And so obviously you guys are providing the visibility into what the attacks might be. Is there any compromise or a difficulty to compromise when you tell someone this is a risk and they need to commit resources to that? How does that exchange usually go? Is it usually they take exactly what you're saying, or is there some sort of a compromise with the ease of use for them versus what you're providing them information wise?
It's often a dialogue, right? I mean, some of these things are, if suddenly customers have discovered that they run this, sensitive data classification product, and suddenly they get 5,000 files that have sensitive information. Yeah. So now this is going to take them a good amount of time to sift through this and actually figure out what are the real issues here. So it's often a dialogue. What we're trying to do is really provide this information to our customers, and then we constantly partner with our customers, because we don't think this is not a one-shot thing, right? It's a journey of discovery for the customers. It's a journey of discovery for us as we learn through them. So what we do is we provide this information. If needed, we even spend some time with our customers, walking them through what this means and how they can adopt some best practices. One of the things we just recently announced, we started this thing called Zero Labs to kind of just provide more information about the threat landscape to our larger community. And this is really about, can we learn from this and keep providing this information, right? So again, as customers, and I mean, let's be honest, right? It's the customers are struggling to deal with a lot of things that are being thrown at them. So the more information and best practices we can share with them, the better equipped they are for all of this. But in some cases, these are simple to resolve. In some cases, it's going to take an initiative that takes 3 months, 6 months to get them into a better shape, right? But if we can provide this information, then organization can prioritize, assess the risk, and prioritize when they do it. Should they do it right now? Should they, do it 3 months from now? It gives them more information to be able to make such decisions.
And would you agree that acting preemptively is always the best thing here? In terms of, you say it could happen 3 months from now, how early do you need to be prepared for that in terms of being ready to deploy resources and stop whatever the attack may be?
Yeah, the best thing you can do is, put in the right kind of, observability and metrics before anything happens, right? Proactively look at it when no attack has happened. That's the best time to go and assess is where the risks are. And then if you can do that, then you're better prepared for anything that happens. That said, when something happens, you have to react to it. But at that time, you don't have the luxury of time because your business is down. There are customers who maybe not able to access your products. You need to act immediately. You don't have the time to think through this and think about what long-term changes you would make. So doing this preemptively, doing this proactively when there hasn't been an attack, lets you plan this out, lets you think about, you know what, we need to rethink the way we are managing this kind of data. Let's put some of these controls in place so that 3 to 6 months from now, we are in a much more secure position as an organization. So this is not easy. And with the changing threat landscape, you constantly have to adapt. But again, if you have this DNA of proactively monitoring, then you're better prepared for anything that might happen, and even different changes you need to make as you assess the threat landscape.
Right, it's amazing. It seems to be ahead of the curve, right? So before we wrap up, where can people find more information on Rubrik?
Yeah, so obviously we have, they can obviously start with our website, but we often do a lot of webinars and just to spread more information within the community. I talked about our Zero Labs initiative, which soon you'll start seeing a lot of information coming through about just what is the threat landscape, what are the best practices, what you should do. And our hope is to really, beyond, obviously providing tools for our customers to be able to handle this, is to really be a source of information and source of best practices that customers can learn from. We also have a bunch of events. We are obviously at events like VMware Explore and so on, but we also have a user conference where we talk about a lot of these things and do a bunch of product introductions as well as best practices and things like that. So and for our customers, we are happy they can reach out to us anytime. We have teams within our customer success organization, our overall go-to-market organization who will jump on it and help our customers through it.
Right.
So we think of different ways and channels in which we can help our customers navigate this landscape.
Right. It's amazing. This is a great conversation, Nitro. Seriously, you guys seem to have a lot going on there. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about this.
Thank you for having me. It was great to have this conversation with you. And it's not an easy problem, but one step at a time. Hopefully, we can.
You just got to keep evolving. Am I right? Got to stay ahead of the curve. Got you. All right, Nitro. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great one. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
Hey everyone, happy Thursday. Cody J. Brown here with some more upcoming programs next week at Techstrong Learning. So we are getting Monday started right at 11 a.m. Eastern. Security Boulevard and Silver Fort bring you Identity Zero Trust, from vision to practical implementation. Our speakers will show you an actionable framework and spend some time analyzing prominent examples from the recent cybersecurity threat landscape. Following on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern, Container Journal has put together a conversation on app dev platforms for Kubernetes. So we'll be taking a look at the current market for Kubernetes app development platforms and what can be done to accelerate the adoption of Kubernetes. And after a good night's rest, Adaptive Shield joins us on Security Boulevard with two security experts to discuss insights from the 2002 SaaS Security Survey Report. Join us for SaaS security trends, challenges, and solutions for 2022 on Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern. So that's all I've got for you right now, but we have more upcoming programs next week. And if you just can't wait until then, look through our on-demand programs at devops.com/webinars, and just be sure to look in the on-demand section. Have a great weekend, everyone.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
The Engineering the Change Scholarship Program offers a life-changing opportunity for a winner from an underrepresented community to change their lives by becoming a full-stack software developer.
The background that you might see that it's a weakness, it's a strength in this field because everyone is constantly looking for people that are going to bring new ideas.
It's an intense 12-week course that is not for the timid.
For real. Who's mastering this right now? Because I sure am not.
So you guys are badass. Like as a class, you guys are crushing it.
You've got to be dedicated. You've got to be ready to do it. Your life has to be ready for it. Follow us as we go through this cohort's Engineering the Change winner on their journey to becoming full-stack engineers.
Welcome! Say with great power comes great responsibility.
Take it down to three finalists. Toria, I'm going to ask you, who really kind of stood out for you?
The three people that stood out to me the most was Stephanie and another woman named Carly and a man named Donald.
Mitchell, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree. Actually, I think those are three great candidates, and I mean, you know very well, right, what it takes to go through this process.
Look, I still love good written and oral skills. I like people who can speak well. I like people who really can write well.
All right.
And I'm going to tell you something. To your point about Stephanie, is it Stephanie Sanchez? Yeah, Stephanie Sanchez. Her essay was one of the best essays I've ever read in the 3 or 4 times we've done this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And bring her into
the golden buzzer.
Yeah.
So,
she's in.
The two other people you mentioned, to me, Carly epitomizes why we do this.
Yeah.
She said something like, her brothers could do it, why couldn't she?
Mm-hmm.
right? Wasn't that in the essay?
Yeah,
And-
that's something that stuck with me, especially as a woman.
Yeah.
Because I think that for her, she was like, if they can do it, and there's not enough women in tech, like she was like, I can do it too, and I love that.
I say send Carly to Hollywood.
Golden buzzer.
Yeah. Donald Bazell, really nice guy. What I liked about his essay is his genuineness. Is that a word?
Yeah, being genuine.
He's genuine.
Yeah.
Right? You got it from him. My only caveat on this is he really doesn't have any tech experience.
Yeah.
So if it's your vote and Mitchell, you don't object, I say let's give Donald the last ticket to Hollywood. And those are our 3 finalists for Engineering the Change. Let's bring them in for interviews and pick our winner.
Okay.
Sounds fun.
Sounds
All
good.
right. We'll see you on the next show.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
This is Techstrong TV.
I have the great pleasure of welcoming back Tim Johnson. Tim is with CloudBees in the compliance and security space, and he and I always have great conversations. Good to have you back, Tim.
Thanks, Mitch. I'm happy to be here. And it's always fun to talk about my favorite and everyone's favorite topic of security and compliance.
Riveting. No, it actually is really entertaining. It is really entertaining. Tell folks a little bit about what you do at CloudBees.
Yeah, I'm a product marketing manager for our new compliance product called CloudBees Compliance. And I've got a background, I've been with CloudBees for about 5 years now. And I also have a background previously in security for quite a few years. So this brings it all home. A lot of time in DevOps and a lot of time in security. So this is ties it all together here.
That is the Reese's peanut butter cup we're trying to figure out how to create, right? The security and software, right? And DevOps.
Yep.
Well, we have coming up here DevOps World on the 27th through the 29th of September. So not too far down the road. And, I think one of the conversations, I'm doing a lot of talks, and I know you are too, about it isn't just like assigning the people, the security work to the software developers or having the operations people do development or vice versa. We really have to rethink about this holistically. And I know you've got some thoughts, but one of the questions is why would and how would we get meaningful conversations to happen with compliance security people? And what are we doing at DevOps World to make that happen? And I'm sure there's a lot of great stuff happening, and I'm going to get your perspective on it too. So you could start wherever you want, but I think that's where we want to go.
Okay, so one of the things in the about regulated industries is they're the people that are paying the compliance tax the most, and the compliance tax is a term we've coined, and it's the effort and cost to do zero value add work that you have to do. And it's amazing the amount of pain that we encounter with people who are struggling with trying to be secure and compliant, because it's, how do you assess whether or not you're secure and compliant, and then how do you attest with confidence that you are, and do you have the data to back that up? One of the surveys we did last year, where they how do you provide the data to the regulators? And one was just raw data, and the other was PowerPoints. Good grief. Not much has changed in a year.
Ouch! That just hurts hearing that.
Yeah, it does. And the some of the things that we've heard from companies, especially regulated industries, is just how difficult it is. We've been doing DevOps for a long time. Why is this still a problem? And our totally biased view is that the concept of shift left, like you mentioned earlier, if we just dump it all on the developers early on, magically everything is going to stay secure and compliant. And the problems we've seen with that is, one, you're dealing with static data, so you're only taking a snapshot of that point. And that data is then dead, and then somebody has to go find it. If you're doing an audit, if you need to assert to a regulatory agency, somebody got to go find that data. And it's to the point where a bank we know has 100 people devoted full time on a 90-day rotating basis just doing audit work.
I'll bet.
100 people, right? Another one of our customers is a global manufacturer of technology, and everybody knows who they are. They've compliance for them, because they sell stuff. So they've got GDPR, global company. They take credit cards, so they got to be PCI compliant. They sell into the federal government, so there's FedRAMP compliance that they have to prove. So there's all these different alphabet soups of regulations that they have to comply to. And then you look at the list of tools that they have, and it looks like one of those market guides from one of the analysts, where there's like 40 or 50 tools in the planning, and 150 in the testing, and that's what they deal with.
Not even a Consumer Reports version of that, I think, would solve the problem. It's a little bit fully in web complicated or something.
Exactly. And so their way of solving the problem is to fund 30 developers and spend $10 million over 2.5 years to get something that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's just, we see that consistently across the board. And if you think back about what the whole point of DevOps is, flow, making things go faster, making things go easier, being able to make sure you're working on the right thing, and being able to improve on that. We're not there yet. The security and compliance is the next major point of friction that's getting in the way of really digital transformation. You started off, let's get our CI going, get our CD and our pipelines going, getting into release orchestration, that's great, getting into progressive delivery, and then the Department of Slow steps in and says, nope. Or with my cell carrier, twice a year, they take their entire DevOps tools team offline to do audit work. You got a problem with your pipeline?
Wow.
Oh, talk to the hand, wait until August 1st.
That's expensive. Wow.
Yes.
Costly.
Yes. So, yeah, those are the things. These are the issues that we're dealing with. We're seeing out in the market with security and compliance on that. So,
it's interesting. And one of the early things that you said that I really resonate with too, that kind of set up that whole conversation, is the mindset of point in time.
Yes.
Right? Because the whole idea, if you're creating flow, you're doing things faster. What you're really doing is you're creating continuous change.
Yes.
And so point in time doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you were compliant 3 weeks ago. Okay, that's really nice. And great report that we produced that said we were compliant and we did what we need to. Well, that's not where we are today, right?
Yeah.
And it could be anywhere from anywhere in our tool chain and our software stack, but the supply chain of third-party SaaS service provider, yada, yada, yada. That's all changing, and we don't control that. So it's not only a moving target. I think it's it's sort of like the galaxy that's propelling itself right out. Right, it's just moving fast,
and it's getting further and further away from you.
Exactly.
And the you talked about one of the problems with the static snapshots is things change, as you mentioned. So if you're using a model pipeline, yes, you use these immutable components. You spun up this container according to the regulations and your own standards and yada, yada, yada. As part of that process, did anybody make any changes to that? After
couldn't have happened.
No, of course not.
I'm sure.
One of the things about bad actors, it's very easy to talk about bad actors because there's a lot of them out there. There's state actors and just hackers and everything else. But there's also the enemy within, both the intentional and the unintentional. On that. And we have an example with a customer where we were working on getting the products running, and great, it's all running now. Got all the communications and protocols and permissions all set up. Great. Let's come back tomorrow and start making it work. Come back, nothing worked. When 6 hours later, we found that overnight, a sysadmin with a console went in and changed some configurations.
Mm-hmm.
Now they worked.
So their change log or their ticketing system, or did you know about it? No, or
Yeah, exactly. And how do you know about that? And one of the other things we heard, one of the real bad stories we heard, was a tester lied about the results for a global bank, an application that was an online. It was their one of their main customer facing applications, and so that lying about that test result meant that their customer database was exposed to the internet. Fortunately, they didn't have a breach, but eventually that was discovered. That stuff happens, right? So most of the way people are trying to do compliance now in the shift left is do that snapshot point in time, and we're good to go from there. And so, part of the theme of DevOps world is, DevOps reimagined. We have to reimagine the whole shift left and the whole DevSecOps concepts from point in time and static to and overwhelming. There's another little sidebar. The day Prakash, our CISO, started on his first day on the job as CISO at a major bank, he had 633,000 critical security alerts he had to deal with.
That sounds like a really bad day at the office.
Yeah. That's a really bad first day at the office. And then how do you prioritize that? How do you sort through that? What's noise?
We know how that goes.
Yeah, exactly, right? So we have to get away from that thinking and move into this has to be holistic. You have to look at the whole thing, and it has to be continuous. That's what DevOps is supposed to be. It's supposed to be continuous. And you have to have context, because okay, you're running Sneak and SonarCube and this and that and all these other tests, and they come back with these, flashing red lights. What does it mean? If you're in the development stage, is that really an issue? Is that really a bad issue? Okay, if the testing, is this something and so forth? So that developer experience, that load that you're dumping on the developer, you have to deal with that. They have to filter through all that noise and figure out what to work on. Engineering managers, they have to, they're paid for innovation, right? They want.
I think they are anyway.
They should be.
Not to be the skeptic. I'm sorry if I'm the skeptic today. You know.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's life. So they want developers to be happy, and we're actually seeing customers where their developers are saying, "This is too hard. I'm out of here. I'm going someplace where
they hate toil. They hate that stuff.
Yeah,
right? All
absolutely.
the technical debt, the backlog. Yeah. That's why I want to go to work. Right?
Yeah, and so they want to keep developers innovating. They want to keep them happy and focused. So they have to make decisions that they can defend. Yeah, you have to fix this now versus no, you actually don't have to fix that at all. It's not really an issue based on the context of where that thing is. And then the risk team, risk management, risk stewards, they have to make decisions on, okay, this is a bad thing. This needs to be fixed now. And then take the evidence to whoever the owner of that asset is and says, this is why you have to fix that now. And then they have to prove up to their management that they are improving the risk posture of the organization. And then the CISO, they're the ones that have to raise their hand and attest that, yeah, we're good to go. And change from being the Department of Slow to the Department of Go. Right, okay. Because that's all in there on that. So, and then just the shared services and DevOps teams, as one of our customers said at our customer advisory board, says we want to get the risk and the security and the compliance and the development people out of our office so we can focus on our job. Which, okay, what they really mean is they want to become a strategic partner with these other organizations. So if they can do something that's going to materially improve the developer experience through the tools that they're implementing, they can create, evidence as a service. So whoever wants to, a CEO or a C-level, can come in and immediately on demand do an assessment and attestation of their risk posture. That lands back on the DevOps teams because they're the ones that got the tools to make it go. So that's where people need to be thinking about, how do we get to that point?
I guess, and this I think is just your point. Said another way, there's got to be a better way. Let's go
Exactly.
find that, right?
Yes, exactly.
Besides you hanging out in my office or me hanging out in yours. And,
again, it's not working. And the number of companies that we've encountered where they are trying to develop this on their own is just amazing. Because, at the end of the day, companies really don't want to do that at a C-level. They need to fix the problem. But if you create this thing internally, now you've got technical debts. Who's going to support it? How are you going to make it? How are you going to continually improve? And does it work? And worse, in larger organizations, we've actually encountered where there were two different solutions for that from two different departments.
I'll bet. Yeah.
And then they have to, now you get into competing. Who's are we going to use? Who's do you trust? And
let me ask you this. So we're trying to create experiences, all of us, DevOps World being one, and CloudBees being the sponsor who's putting on, which, by the way, is not just a CloudBees event, right? This is not a customer conference. This is a DevOps World, one of the biggest ones, we've had for a long time. It's a great conference. We're trying to create experiences where we are talking about the things we need to be talking about, right? Sharing things, working on these kind of problems. So if you're a compliance person, you're a security person, governance, you're somewhere in that kind of dimension of, okay, I got to figure out the better way, right? Where do I go to find this? Well, let's go where the people who are working on this are. What a great idea. Let's go to DevOps World. If you're easy for you to do, because you talk with so many people, so many customers in the industry, what's a great way, kind of mental mindset or approach, go to DevOps World and have this conversation? Where do you look for it to happen? What do you go to intend for? Who are the kind of people to seek out? What advice would you have for people?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. Great question. The thing about DevOps World, and the thing, it ties into the dynamic of all these companies we talked to that are trying to do it themselves, is if you're trying to do it yourself, you're probably thinking in a vacuum. Like, this is our unique problem. Well, no. And when you go to DevOps World, you get to talk to people who've solved or are in the process of solving the problem you're trying to solve. And so getting back to, there's got to be a better way. There's a whole bunch of people that are working on a better way. And no, your situation isn't unique. You might have unique little bits here and there, but if you step back and look at what are you trying to accomplish, you're trying to deliver better software faster and get an ROI on the digital transformation promise, right? That's what everybody's trying to do. And why, use an old phrase, why reinvent the wheel? Go talk to other people that are really smart people that are there, that are working on things. They may have a solution that is absolutely perfect for you. There might be an open source thing that you didn't know about that'll drop right in. You may find a commercial product that acts, locks right in with what you want to do, and you get to talk to other people and share war stories. And oh yeah, I did this, and what do you do, and so forth. Everybody brings something to the table. It's not just go and take. Because there will be people that want to talk to you about your experiences and what you did.
I think it's a really good point. I'm going to badly butcher it, but the Einstein quote about the thinking that created the problem is not the thinking that will get you out of the problem.
Right.
Something to that effect. You can't solve it yourself. You can't because it isn't just it affect you either. And you also don't know what the other people in that software chain and the architecture and the platform engineering and the DevOps team and the automation, all of that are part of the solution. And you're not going to solve it without bringing it together, getting it together, at least getting those perspectives and talking with people about how they think they can be part of helping finding a better way, right? And that's the great thing I think about our kinds of conferences, about DevOps world. It isn't just go listen to a bunch of speakers. It isn't just go to the vendor booths, and those are all things there. Those are all great things there. It's the hallway track, right? That's the track that really where sort of the magic plus happens. The magic happened in those other areas, and now the magic plus happens there. And that's where Tim and I bump into each other and you say, I had this really amazing conversation with this bank, yada, yada, et cetera. And all of a sudden we're on to, okay, there's an idea there. Or something I can take back, right?
Yeah. So one of the questions, there may be people who are a little reticent about trying to kick off a conversation with a complete stranger at the lunch table or whatever, but there's some good opening lines. It's okay. So what problems are you trying to solve in your job? Or another one is, so what have you seen that was really interesting or caught your eye or gave you an aha moment or something like that? And you'll be off rather than, what you do. That's So what are you trying to solve? Here's something that I'm trying to solve. Have you done anything like that? Or,
Exactly. So, and you invariably, even just asking, like, so what do you do? That'll lead to, okay, here's what I do, here's what I'm working on. And or the other thing you can do, and I love what you're saying, the other thing you can do is, here's a problem I'm thinking about. Is anybody thinking about this too, or have any ideas, suggestions, and just kind of put it out there. I bet you're not the only one going to be thinking. Maybe you're thinking about it differently or not, but that's a great starter too of, don't know what all you do, but here's a starting place. What do you think? And they'll jump in, right? Whatever perspective they're bringing.
Yeah. And that's a good thing. And, there's that, several years of pent up interpersonal social deficit.
Yeah. Be careful what you ask for, right?
Yeah. Actually get out and talk to people and the people's horizontal and vertical aspect ratios are actually going to be different than what you expect from 2 years on Zoom and so forth.
Well, encourage folks to check out DevOpsWorld.com. That's where you can sign up and register. It's in Orlando, 27th through the 29th. Hopefully we'll see a good mix of some security compliance regulatory folks there. I look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, me too. And we have a number of sessions that are being presented by people from companies from heavily regulated industries. So there'll be a lot of content for folks.
Not just product pitches, right?
They're not product pitches.
Some of those things there too, but one of the things I would suggest to folks too, you and I have known each other for a while now, Tim. Tim is a great wealth of information. And whether you're thinking about CloudBees as a product, now or in the future, or maybe not yet, et cetera, I would encourage folks to reach out to you to have those conversations because, like I said, you talk to so many folks. Do you mind giving out a way of how people can get a hold of you?
Well, I'll be there on the I'll be on the main stage on the keynote for the first day, so I'm kind of easy to see there, and I'll be on the CloudBees booth for most of the rest of the time. We've got a session on the compliance tax, so I'll be easy to find. Come look me up. If you can't find me, come to the CloudBees booth and ask, and they'll chase me down.
Perfect. Yeah, it sounds like you should be pretty easy to find. So.
Yep.
Well, Tim, thank you. Great talking with you, Tim Johnson from CloudBees. And I think I always enjoy this conversation. I was kidding up front about, compliance security. It is a really fascinating conversation.
It is.
And a tough problem to solve. So
yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me.
You bet. Good luck at the show.
All right. Thanks.
This is Techstrong TV.
I have a distinct pleasure being joined by Lee Atchison today. He is an author. He is a cloud expert. He's with Atchison Technology. He's an author, written books. He writes articles, consulting, lots of things that you do. But most of it is about sharing your expertise, which is what we're here for today. So welcome, Lee.
Thank you, Mitch. It's great to be here.
Good to have you. Well, tell us a little bit. I sort of like dabbled in telling us about yourself, but why don't you give us an accurate picture?
Sure. No, that's you did fine. Basically, I've been in the industry for forever. It seems like it's been about 30 years now, but the last 15 years in particular is probably the most important. I spent the last 15 years in a combination of Amazon and New Relic. And Amazon, I was there during the early days when the retail organization was building everything in a monolithic application, and they were just starting to split it into microservice-based architecture. Mm-hmm. And then I was there when AWS first got its kickoff and its start, and involved through that whole process and build one of the early services that is Elastic Beanstalk that came out of AWS.
I remember.
And so I've been involved in a lot of the early days and in DevOps and cloud native and microservice architectures and in all of those different technologies. I was involved a lot in the early days at Amazon and making those things happen. So then I moved to New Relic, and New Relic at the time, now they're a relatively large company, but at the time they were a small startup. The entire development team just fit into one small room and in the Portland office, and but they were struggling with scaling, and that's where I realized that a lot of my expertise at Amazon could help them, and that led me eventually to write the book Architecting for Scale, which is kind of led to my whole writing consulting gig as we go along there.
Well, perfect timing for it. Who knew we would have this acceleration with transformational kind of applications, going to digital experiences, and let's move everything to the cloud in a compressed period over, the pandemic and all of that. Boy, it's like you planned it or something. But
well, I don't think I planned it, but but it certainly seems like it. Yeah, I spent several years in New Relic. The last several years traveling across the world. I mean, I would do 3.5 weeks a month traveling to see customers and doing different things. And that ended, and then the pandemic started. And it was almost perfect timing, but that really is the kickoff that led into my next stage of life, which is basically what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's timing is everything, right? Sometimes better
exactly
than good. It just feel fortunate when that happens. Well, you know what? I think a really great topic for us to talk about is, there's so much kind of around modernization of applications, whether you're doing stuff with, current apps or modernization of digital experiences and things like that. And so you have these tracks of what's happening in the business world and the acceleration of business and wanting to leverage software and make that more a part of their strategy. You also have, of course, move the cloud and move to architectures like cloud native and new technologies.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be a royal crash in the highway, or it can be, get things in the fast lane and it really works well. I think a great conversation for us is like, what are those things that you've seen that help people while they're trying to make changes, like putting in DevOps to be able to do software faster, but we're also going to do some cloud native or strategies like that. What are your thoughts around that?
Sure. So, for a company that really is struggling with modernizing, I think one of the first things they need to really wrap their mind around is DevOps, right? DevOps is probably the oldest of the modern technologies, if you will, but it's really the most critical. It's the most central. Yeah, it's a central aspect to everything that goes on, and it's almost taken for granted now when you talk to mainstream media. Everyone, of course, must be doing DevOps. Yet there are still a lot of companies that still struggle with it. Concepts, especially concepts like continuous delivery. It's difficult for a lot of established companies. What I try and get across to people when I talk to them is the concept that the more often you release, the less risk you're taking, and that seems counterintuitive to someone working, especially if you're working in an established corporation, established enterprise with established processes. That whole concept of moving fast means less risk is foreign to them, and so it really is, I think, the central aspect to what you have to get over that hurdle in order to truly encompass continuous delivery and in order to encompass DevOps. And the other thing that's kind of related to that is what you hear is, I can't release more often. My test suites take this long to run, or I have to spend all this time going through a QA process and all these layers of bureaucracy necessary before I'm even allowed to release something. Well, it's sometimes I go to those companies and I say, well, just get rid of all of that. Just don't test at all. Now, that might be a little extreme, and certainly a lot of companies don't go from one end to the other very quickly.
They don't kick you out the door, right?
yeah. If they don't kick me out the door, that's true. But what the idea is that the fast-moving process itself provides you a buffer for testing, right? Mm-hmm. You reduce the amount of testing so you can move faster, and because you're moving faster, you can respond to problems quicker, and as a result of that, you don't need to test as much up front. So it's a cycle that builds on itself, but you have to get on the cycle first, and it's a very, very hard thing for large enterprises to do. They're so used to checklists and processes and all these layers necessary of approvals to get things done, and that goes completely against the grain of DevOps. So that's
every one of those steps or checks, or a lot of them happen because some problem occurred one time, and so we add more to the process, right, to prevent bad things. We have
exactly
100 bad things that should never happen, but probably aren't going to happen anyway.
That's right. Decades of risk aversion has led to the point where you are no longer managing risk, you're avoiding risk. And that's a death nail for most modern companies.
Yeah. It's interesting. I just went through a process kind of like this, and I'm not in large enterprise, so not speaking at that level in any way. But when you're launching new products, doing new things, you have an even greater flexibility for that sort of how much testing do you do, right? Because a lot of times it's just you need to get things in market and get people to use it. But if you've got a process where you can react quickly and respond and fix that or add that or take it off, disable it, whatever, feature flag it, whatever you're doing, you don't have to have everything as perfect as we thought we needed to have. Of course, it was never perfect.
Yeah. It's I think that's the fallacy, right? Your enterprises think that by going through all these steps, we're making quality better, and so therefore it's perfect, right? We're striving for perfection, and you're never going to get there. And in fact, the best way to get something high quality is not to strive for perfection, but rather to experiment and take chances and controlled chances, managed chances, yes, but chances, and things just get better as time goes on.
It's that repetition, the improvement. right? It's
Exactly.
It's all you don't win the basketball game, by shooting one basket, right? There's a whole
Right.
series of plays that lead up to great how you get there. Well, let's so DevOps is obviously a big part of it because it's about how you create software and be able to release it on a much more increased velocity, much more frequent, where you can in your organization. Right. As you put those things in place, what's sort of the next part to look at and re-examine?
Sure. So, the next thing that you hear about is cloud native, right? And I think the cloud native is really two distinct things. There's a whole bunch of things that make up cloud native, but there's really two aspects of modernization that enterprises go through when they think about wanting to be cloud native. The first one is wanting to be wanting to utilize the public cloud and get the benefits of the public cloud. And two is the concept of moving an application from a monolith to microservices. Mm-hmm. Really, when you pull everything away, unveil the onion, pull things apart, that's all that cloud native is those two things. Now, 5 years ago, the moving to the cloud part was the hard part, right? That's where people were focused on having a hard time struggling making it happen. I think that's getting easier and easier as time goes on. It's becoming less critical of a complex step than it used to be. The biggest struggle I used to hear about cloud migrations were companies who said, I can't trust the cloud. It's not secure. What do we do? We can't move this workload to the cloud. We have to leave it on premise because it's got high security requirements. And it's a tough transition, but I think people are finally making this transition to realize that the cloud can be and is more secure than your data center. The processes that are in place to help you provide the tooling you need to build a secure application are part and parcel of what's available in the cloud. And cloud providers have a strong desire to make sure your application is secure. So they build strong infrastructures and provide tools to you to make your application as secure as possible. And they provide best practices that have worked with decades of experience that they have available to them, much more experience than you have in your company, no matter how big of a company you are. Mm-hmm. And all of that experience is driven towards best practices for using their tools to make your application safe in their environment. And if you follow those best practices, you will have as secure of an application as you can get, much more secure than you could possibly build in your own data center. So I think companies are starting to get there. I mean, I used to hear this all the time in certain geographies, specifically in Western Europe, and certain industries, specifically healthcare and finance. Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing it less and less now, probably still hearing it a little bit in some niche markets like Swiss private banks are still very reluctant to move to the cloud still. But that's just starting to transition. But I think more and more the acceptance of the cloud and what's needed to move to the cloud is becoming more mainstream and more acceptable. What isn't, though, is a realization of what the cost structure is for the cloud, mm-hmm. and the changes available to you in that cost structure. And you still see a lot of companies do let me lift and shift to the cloud. And once I shifted to the cloud, guess what? The infrastructure costs more. Oh, obviously the cloud is more expensive, so I move back to my own data center. But that doesn't encompass, all of the advantages of the cloud. It doesn't talk about, dynamic resourcing. It doesn't talk about changing financial models for how you can account for your infrastructure, from capital expenditures that you have in your own data center to operating costs, cost of goods sold sort of operating costs that you have in the cloud, and the ease at which you can adjust your infrastructure costs to match what your real needs are. And when you take all of those things into account, the cloud is almost always cheaper than an on-premise data center. But it's hard to convince people of that.
But just think about when you're building data centers, you always have a horizon, right? How far ahead are we planning? So we have X capacity for the next 3 years, 5 years?
Exactly.
So you're overbuying to start with for your own data center. And so when you're lifting all that up there, you're kind of taking that whole same approach.
Exactly.
Sort of over-provisioned everything in a lot of ways. Here's an idea I want to run by you. I also think that as you start to move to more of a faster delivery pace with how you create software and deliver software, the fact that you're on someone else's cloud, you're in that environment, who knows how to run it very well. Let's assume that they know what they're doing. They do. Mm-hmm. But they're also not only good at that, they're also good at introducing new services and incrementing those services on top of that much better than you're going to be able to do. You're not going to be able to put your own, going back to Java Bean days, right? Your own version of whatever service up there and maintain it yourself and keep it upgraded and, in pace with what's happening. So you actually can accelerate the technology maturity and adoption of that at the same time with your apps.
Oh, absolutely agree with you. I think it's, when a enterprise is in the muck of trying to get their application working in the cloud and justifying the expenses and making that happen, it's hard for them to think about that part of it. Mm-hmm. You really have to start with here's the benefit you're going to see right now. And by the way, once you see those benefits, now let's start looking towards the future of leverage buys and leverage technology builds and the value of shared infrastructure in general from the standpoint of all of these value-added services that are being built that they could never be built for a single customer, but are being built in such a way that you can take advantage of them easily and efficiently. So, shared infrastructures have huge advantages. It's shared infrastructure is not a dirty word, as a lot of people in security aspects used to think. But shared infrastructure truly is valuable and is a benefit to you and your application.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned the move from monolith to microservices. Easy to say, but that's a big shift.
Boy, that's a huge one. It's not an easy transition. If someone's looking today to build a new application from scratch, I almost invariably tell them, yes, use a microservice architectural pattern. Start day one. Don't try and retrofit it later. Do it, build it in from the beginning. But moving existing applications, the benefits of moving a lot of these large monoliths that have gotten so large and complex that they can't easily be grown and developed on anymore. The benefit of moving them is huge, but so is the cost of moving them. Mm-hmm. And so I work with lots of clients who are in that migration. They want to move to microservices from a monolith. I mean, that's the situation Amazon was in when I moved to Amazon. It was a multi-year project they went through to move from their, what they called Obidos, which was their Amazon retail stack, which was a single monolith of everything that runs within Amazon fits within this monolith, to their distributed, they called it at the time Garupa, but I'm not sure what it's called nowadays, their distributed environment. And they were able to move from a model where they could release code once every couple of weeks if they were lucky and struggling to get releases out the door, to a model where they're releasing code thousands of times a day or even thousands of times an hour in some respects, and depending on how you measure it. And it's just so much easier to innovate and to develop and grow in a monolithic application. But moving a monolith to microservices is not an easy transition, and success is not guaranteed. One of the things whenever I start with a client that's doing this, is I talk about what I call the valley of despair. That is if you look at it like an XY quadrant, and as time and energy effort goes into a migration, and it's on the horizontal axis, on the vertical axis is value out of that effort. And you like to see nice curves like this, right? As you put in effort, you get value out. That's not what happens at all in a microservice migration. What happens is it goes down for a while, and then it shoots way up. So you go for a long period of time during a migration where you're putting in tons and tons of effort for not only no gain, but for negative gain.
Mm-hmm.
You are making things worse in your application as you put energy in to do this migration. And then suddenly you start seeing the benefits and things get better. You know, the light at the end of the tunnel, everything's great and wonderful. And that's where you want to get to. But going through that valley of despair is very, very hard. And I've seen company after company stop their migration right at the low point because it's like, we can't do this anymore. This is too expensive. It's not working. We don't want it to happen. I've even seen companies declare victory at the bottom, where they say, well, now at least we know how to do microservices. We've learned how to do this. We'll finish this another time in the future. But right now we need to stop. We got more important things to do. And they stop at just the wrong time. It's a really hard thing to do. So one of the first conversations I have with a company when I'm brought in as a consultant to talk about this migration process is to go through this valley and to get a commitment from high in the management chain to know what that valley means and the impact of stopping early. And you have to have that commitment. Otherwise, don't even start.
One of the challenges can be, and this is an experience that I had moving from monolith into the cloud and moving some of it to cloud native, was the people who built it were no longer there, that they had retired, or, this is for 15 plus years, right? Moved on to other jobs. It wasn't a large team, but 10 so people that were kind of core to working on it. So there was a lot of hesitance to touch big parts of it because people were afraid to break it. So we're not only slow to release it, there are parts we just didn't want to update because nobody would do it. They thought they'd lose their job. So what we ended up doing was we did this analysis and said, well, in the business, here's the services we want to start offering. Here's what we'd like to experiment with in market.
Yeah.
And so can we carve out part of the app and only rebuild that part of it in microservices and then connect it back into the monolith through whatever APIs were. It was a .NET application at the time, ASP.NET. And it worked out to be pretty good because we didn't take on too much, and we got enough that we could start to go experiment and market, create some new services, built a new UI for it. And that seemed to work pretty good for that particular application. Sometimes you can't be, that fortunate to say, well, the whole thing's got to change, right? That's a hard lift.
Yeah, it is. It is. And actually, the technique you're talking about there is the technique that I ultimately recommend when they start down this process. Unfortunately, when you don't have something as clearly defined as what you're talking about in that example, you have to decide what part of the monolith do you want to pull out first.
Mm.
And invariably, what happens is you pick something, you pull it out, and that creates warts on the side of the monolith. You pull these individual things out, and you end up with separate services that are not any easier to support than they were in the monolith, that now have network connections that they didn't have before,
more complex,
to warts on the side of a monolith that isn't really any smaller than it was before. And that's the part of this valley that I'm talking about.
That's where you're making it worse before it gets better.
You're making it worse before you make it better. Yeah. So it's the right approach to take, but just realize that sometimes if you're in one of these situations where you're developing a whole new product line or a whole new connection, that you still need the monolith, but it's a separate entity, if you will. That's a great opportunity to build that into services and then make the interconnects back to the monolith. And you end up with fewer warts, fewer problems in the monolith, and your new business is working in the new model.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. And that's fine too. You end up with some organizational challenges because you supporting a monolith the development process for building a monolith is very different than the development process for building services. So now your organization is split into two and has different processes, systems, culture, and keeping that working and sustained over the long term can be difficult as well too. Sometimes what happens is companies do that and they build services, but ultimately what ends up happening is they treat the services like mini monoliths, and then they put them back into their main processes. And now they don't have one monolith, they have 10 monoliths, just some of them are smaller than others. and it's that
maybe
happens,
it's a little better, but not, it wasn't
exactly. Yeah. And so I really hesitate working with a company that wants to increment into microservices. It's like, that's fine from a technology standpoint to increment in, but from a mindset standpoint, you have to be focused on the goal. You have to be focused on the transition that's needed to make that happen, or it's not necessarily worthwhile to even start.
It's kind of like if you're going to shift from designing passenger cars to race cars, you kind of have to get into the mold of a race car designer. Right?
That's right. That's right.
You passenger car, like you thought about, 55 to 75 mile an hour traffic.
And if you've never been in a race car, I mean,
that might be important too. Or around the track. Well, it's been a lot of fun. Enjoy talking with you, Lee. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your book. Tell folks about Architecting for Scale.
Sure. So I alluded a little bit when I first started that the book came out of my experiences at New Relic, where I discovered that they were going through the pains of growing from a startup to a large company with a large, highly scaled application. And they were going through all the availability and scalability pains of making that happen. I learned a lot of techniques in Amazon for how to avoid that. I'm not really talking about the coding aspects. The book isn't about coding for scale or coding for availability. It's more about the systems and processes and cultural aspects of what it takes to build an organization that supports a modern application. How do you organize your company to support services? How do you organize your company to provide service tiers within your application? How do you deal with SLAs? What does that mean? How do you those sorts of aspects? And so I took the things I learned from Amazon and applied when I moved to New Relic, and I put it into a book. Well, when I did that, New Relic sent me on the road to talk to our customers about all these concepts, and it's amazing the amount of feedback I got from customers who agreed with all the things I was doing and helping, and then they would introduce their own stories and their own lessons and say, "Oh, this is what we learned," and all those sorts of things. And so that led to the second edition of the book, which is the version you see behind me now. O'Reilly, the book did well enough. They wanted to do a second edition, so I built that. The second edition is, about 50% longer, but about 80% new content. And so it's got a lot of the learnings from taking the first version of the book on the road, talking to customers, and applying those changes back into the book as well. So this book came out about a year ago, and I hope you end up buying a copy and then taking a look at it. It's available from Amazon and all of the normal places, and it's part of the O'Reilly Safari program as well.
Well, having read the book, I would highly recommend it. So
thank you.
It's an excellent read, and there is a ton of good information in there. Not just sort of theoretical explanation. There's some real practical stuff, though. I think it's super helpful. So, well, thank you, Lee. Where can folks either check out more? I know you've written more than that book, have other things that you're doing, as well as your consulting practice. Where can they connect with you?
Sure. Best place is to go to leeatchison.com. Or you can also check out my podcast at mdb.fm, Modern Digital Business, mdb.fm.
Great. We have an episode coming out soon. I was a guest.
Do.
Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Of course, September 12th.
September 12th. Be there. All right, Lee. Thanks for joining us again. Look forward to coming back soon.
Thanks, Mitch.
You bet.
is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're talking with Rishabh Potter, who is CEO for Opaque Systems, and we're talking about confidential computing. And a lot of people will go, well, what the heck is that? So let's just jump right into it. And I don't know, Rishabh, do you want to give an explanation of confidential computing? I mean, my simple explanation is we can encrypt data at rest and we can encrypt data in motion, but now we can encrypt data in memory while it's processing, and that's known as confidential computing, but I'm sure there's a more technical explanation.
You got it absolutely spot on, Mike. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. So confidential computing is, like you described, a new and emerging technology that was pioneered in the last decade, but is now available on all major cloud providers. And essentially, like you said, what it allows you to do is keep data protected even during runtime, which is where the revolution and the change in paradigm comes from. Because if we take a step back and look at the state of data protection that exists in the world today, right? As an industry, we know how to protect data at rest. So when it's stored on disk or it's in the cloud, it can be encrypted using standard encryption mechanisms that are NIST approved. And it's become a default protection that we adopt today. We also know how to encrypt data in motion. So when data is being sent over the network from a source to sink over the internet, we can once again use standard encryption mechanisms to keep the data protected as well. But what is not widely adopted or deployed today, which makes data vulnerable to breaches and exposure, is a lack of protection for data in use. Right now, when data needs to be processed by software on the clouds or on-prem or anywhere at all, it needs to be unencrypted for the software to be able to actually process the data. But with confidential computing, the data remains protected even when it's being processed by the machine, even when you're running software on top of it. So when the data is in main memory or during computation, it remains encrypted and protected as well. I can give you very briefly how this technology works. Is that you can think of the CPU as sort of a black box. Now, when protected data, or data that needs to be protected, is loaded inside this black box, only there is it decrypted, deep down in the CPU die by the hardware itself. And the hardware ensures that no software on the machine, in some cases, not even the operating system or privileged software that exists in the machine, can penetrate this black box and sort of get access to unencrypted data. They can look at memory, but memory is always encrypted. And the only way to actually get access to unencrypted data is to physically attack the CPU die and chip, but you'll end up destroying it in the process. And it's designed to be tamper resistant. So it's very, very strong security guarantees that you get as a result of this confidential computing technology that is rooted in specialized hardware that is now easily available on the clouds. So the barrier to adopt confidential computing has sort of gone away. And there is a rich emerging ecosystem around confidential computing that is using this core capability in very exciting ways. Our focus at Opaque is to enable analytics and AI at scale on confidential data and to enable data collaboration. But that is just one of the many things that we can do with it. And I think as an industry, the aim is to make confidential computing the default. No matter what the workload is, no matter what the data is, things should always be processed in a confidential way, similar to what we have with protection for data at rest and for data in motion today.
Are the bad guys targeting data while it's processing because it's not encrypted? Are they after that? Or is this more of an issue that we know we're going to be concerned about in the future, but the bad guys haven't quite figured out how to do that particular hack yet?
I would say that the bad guys currently don't often need to target data in use even, because in many cases of data exposure, even the data is often not encrypted at rest. And there are other forms of violating data confidentiality through phishing attacks and so forth. But as these processes become stronger, data in use will become more important and the more sought after target. That is one example of how confidential computing can help de-risk cloud deployments in cloud-based migration and digital transformation. But also, more crucially, I think, is this opens up the world of collaborating on confidential data. And what do I mean by that? I mean by, in many cases, because this data is so confidential, or it can contain sensitive personally identifiable information, so PII information, or sensitive health information. And because of this confidentiality, this data is often locked down on-prem in silos. It can't be shared in many cases across teams within the same organization because of very cumbersome governance processes, let alone sharing this data outside the organization boundaries, moving it to the cloud, or sharing it within your business ecosystem for deriving some mutual benefit. This is not possible right now without having to trust a third party if you want to share and collaborate on confidential data yourselves. For example, banks can now collaborate towards fighting financial crime more effectively. Human traffickers, money launderers, criminals hide their traces across multiple banks. In the absence of a technology like this, the best that each bank can do is look at its individual transaction data, identify patterns, and flag suspicious transactions. But criminals hide their traces across multiple banks. So to be able to detect financial criminals more effectively, banks need to be able to collaborate with each other and share data. They can't do this right now because, one, they're competing with each other, there are laws and regulations in place, and the data is super confidential. But with this technology, they can each encrypt their data individually, pool it together in the cloud in a secure environment, and then jointly train models or jointly run analytics on the collective data that benefits everyone. Healthcare is another very good example as well. Hospitals and health institutions can collaborate towards better patient profiling, towards better disease prediction, which they can't do right now because it's very sensitive patient data. COVID is actually a very topical example around this. But there's one thing we saw during COVID is that contact tracing could have helped solve the problem to a large extent, perhaps, or mitigate it. But the moment we tried to deploy contact tracing solutions, we found that we needed to be able to combine patient data from various health repositories. And the moment we tried to do that, all these data confidentiality concerns came to the forefront, thwarting those efforts to a large extent. Such problems can be effectively mitigated and solved using confidential computing technology as well, because you don't have to trust anyone with the data. I don't have to trust you. You don't have to trust me. Neither of us has to trust the software or the cloud. But we can each encrypt our data individually, pull it together, and then run analytics and machine learning on top of it. And that, to me, is the most exciting value prop here.
Does that mean long term that we can get rid of a lot of these compliance motions? Because today, for example, companies are doing cartwheels for stock compliance and all this other stuff. And it's really just about trying to verify whether or not somebody could access data or not. But if no one actually ever sees the data in the first place, then I don't really care who's running the machines on the other end, right?
That's an excellent. I would say that this would make compliance easier. I wouldn't say that this is a silver bullet because there are lots of controls around processes and best practices and other auxiliary security issues. So in which case, confidential computing can help comply with these laws and emerging regulations, which are getting stricter globally, as we know. But you would still need other solutions around it to comply with all aspects of the law. So, for example, GDPR requires that data needs to be deleted securely. You would still need to implement controls like that within the software. So in which case, it's not a silver bullet, but it makes it much, much easier to comply with requirements that around anonymizing or pseudonymizing data before sharing with a third-party processor. Because now the data remains encrypted, so you get much stronger security guarantees as a result.
As we go along here, as I understand it, we need a special class of processors, whether they're from Intel or somebody else, to go and take advantage of this capability. So is it expensive in the cloud, or we reach a point soon where the cost of that drops to the point where it's a small difference and people are just going to use it by default? I mean, where are we on that curve?
That is certainly where we want to be, where everything is confidential by default, it's not cost prohibitive. For example, the price of a confidential computing VM, a VM that runs on hardware that is on servers that has this capability, is within a few tens of percentage more expensive than a regular virtual machine. So I would between that and up to 2x is what I believe it to be right now. So it's not very expensive in terms of money or cost of just renting those machines on the cloud. There is another aspect of cost that is around cost of performance. So if you are running workloads or big data workloads or cluster computing workloads on these machines, do you pay a price in terms of performance overhead? Is it slower? And that depends on the workload itself and the specific hardware that you are using. But even there, based on our benchmarking, we see performance overheads ranging from a few percentage points to a few tens of percent. And this is constantly improving and being innovated upon. And a lot of the software ecosystem that is now emerging around this space specifically takes into account the architecture of these machines and builds software that can remain as performant as a regular CPU-based computation. So I don't think it's super expensive to adopt.
Do you think we still suffer from some notions about encryption and performance that people don't encrypt because they have it in their heads that this is a performance issue, but maybe, we're getting better at this and the hardware is advanced and maybe we should take a second or even a third look at this?
I completely agree with you. I mean, and honestly, to some part of that is, it almost seems like black magic, right? Like, how can you compute with data if it's encrypted? Because encryption turns data sets into gibberish, and that's what it's meant to do. So how can you even compute on those data sets? So that education is, of course, that we need to do more around and drive more awareness, and the cloud providers are also doing a lot of good work in this space. And then there is this other angle here where cryptographers have, this problem has been studied for decades of how do you compute on encrypted data. And a decade ago, cryptographers invented fully homomorphic encryption schemes that allow data to be computed upon while keeping it encrypted at all times. Beautiful cryptography, these are specialized techniques with very beautiful mathematics underneath it. These technologies, however, still suffer from high resource consumption and slowdown in performance. They're not as scalable yet as regular vanilla computation. And many organizations are now looking to adopt these technologies as well. But when we talk about big data analytics or machine learning workloads, we still need to make more progress on the cryptography front, where we get to a point where you can use these specialized cryptographic approaches for processing such workloads. Confidential computing takes a different view to it because it's based on hardware, which used to be the barrier to adoption. So there is no specialized cryptographic technique that's involved here. The encryption and decryption are being done by the hardware itself. The reason it's fast is because when the data is being processed, it is processed within this confidential computing hardware environment. So it is decrypted within it. And then the software is analytics or machine learning workloads, whatever you're running, takes place on the decrypted data. But when data is in memory, as it moves in and out of this environment, it remains encrypted. So you at once get the very strong benefits of keeping data encrypted or protected when it's being computed upon. But you get the strong performance properties of a CPU or of a machine as well. So it provides the best of both worlds, in my view, to some sense.
Who is going to drive adoption of confidential computing? Is it going to be the developers who are building the applications because they have to do things that invoke those APIs? Or is it the security team who's going to stand up and say, guys, we're sick and tired of these issues and thou shalt use confidential computing?
That's an excellent question. And the answer to that, I believe, would be, what do you want to use confidential computing for? If you want to de-risk your existing applications and software by adopting confidential computing, then that would be driven by the security teams. But when we look at use cases around data collaboration and data sharing and analytics and machine learning, that is driven by the business teams and the owners of that use case, or the product teams even, or the data analytics teams, who would want access to more data that is currently locked down, which they currently can't get access to. And confidential computing provides a solution to that problem. So, I think this would depend on what you want to use confidential computing for. And there is a lot of innovation that's happening along both fronts.
All right, folks. Well, you heard it here. We can now encrypt data end to end, essentially, while it's running, while it's at rest, and while it's moving around. Guess there's really not much of an excuse anymore not to encrypt everything. Hey.
I would completely agree with that sentiment.
All right. Rishab, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike. It was a pleasure.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Divya Wadwani, who is Director of Education Programs for Harness, and they have Harness University specifically. And we're talking about DevOps, software development lifecycle, and the need for training, and just where are we going to find all the skills we need. Divya, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
There are a lot of training programs out there. They all seem to be called the university for one reason or another. I don't know why, but I guess my first question to you is, what ultimately differentiates one training program from another? There's a lot of choices out there, so why should folks look to Harness University versus anywhere else at the moment?
So Harness University provides really easy to access affordable resources to a really growing community of practitioners, developers, DevOps engineers, and truly organizations wanting to learn about innovations within the software delivery space. And truly what ties that in is the best practices therein. So Harness University is your training and certification hub that brings together those best practices in a variety of formats. In live training, which is workshop, lab-based. We have more than 70 plus courses in a self-paced format, hundreds of hours of webinars from experts in this space, and truly addressing it from a role-based as well as product-based perspective. So we are really trying to bring in those best practices and innovations that we're seeing in the market in a very fast evolving field that truly differentiates us.
We see that there's a lot of demand for DevOps professionals, and we also see that there's a lot of IT folks that are interested in DevOps best practices, but there's still this shortage of supply. So from your perspective, what is the hurdle, or what are the challenges that people face, and what do we got to do to get them into the program?
Yeah, no, great question. We're seeing this a lot from the research that we've seen. More than 80% of the organizations have a gap in at least one business area. With DevOps skills and developer skills and others in that software delivery space. That coupled with the Great Resignation has created gaps. In addition to digital transformation initiatives that are really spearheading all of these organizations. So that truly presented us with the challenge to create an offering that would address these IT skills gap. So Harness University brings to bear a lot of different training opportunities and easy to access paths for all of the different roles in these organizations to take advantage of. In addition, we've just launched a certification program that addresses entrants, especially new folks that are trying to learn this space, or folks that are trying to make a career change into software delivery. We're trying to reduce the barrier to entry with this certification program and giving them a pathway to success in this space.
I think a lot of individuals in this industry have a love-hate relationship with certification. So what's your sense of why do we need a DevOps related certification these days? What's the upside?
So that's a great question, and we thought about this a lot when we decided to launch our very first certification here, which is the Software Delivery Foundations Associate Certification. And one of the pieces we realized is everyone needed some grounding in the fundamentals of software delivery. Really, what is that software delivery lifecycle? What are the different roles that you have in that life cycle? What do they do in each part of that life cycle? What are the differences between continuous integration and continuous delivery? What are the security practices that are relevant in that software delivery space? So we wanted something that would really provide folks those fundamentals and the fundamental knowledge that then sets them up for success in more advanced topics like the DevOps practices or the security practices. And we feel like it's a great way for everyone to understand where they're at and where their gaps are. So certifications provide a great way to do that. It also provides a great way for advanced practitioners to get that next job role, get that next career opportunity, get that next promotion. So it serves multiple facets of what folks are looking for, whether it's entry into the space or an advancement into the space.
I feel like sometimes, and from a hiring perspective, that companies are mathematically challenged. They expect to fill all these positions with people who have 4-year degrees, but by the time they get a 4-year degree, the world will have passed them by. So have we an issue now with how do we train folks without necessarily requiring them to go to college for 4 years to get the right skills that we need? I mean, do we need to think about this in smaller monthly, maybe 1 year, 2 year jumps or programs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the philosophies I've certainly adopted here is you meet your audience where they want to be. So there are several folks that love an instructor-based setting where they want to come in, do a workshop-style, lab-based format where they really get hands-on quickly. And Harness University offers multiple forums to be able to do that in a monthly cadence, and it's free of cost. So we're truly encouraging people to learn and learn as quickly as they can. But there are others that want to learn in their own time in a self-paced fashion, and so we give them those opportunities as well. And our credentialing framework that we've put together, where we award them completion certificates. So they don't necessarily have to wait for 2 years to get a completion certificate to show that they've learned something. They can get it within a span of weeks or even months. And then you tie that into a certification where at the end of taking these multitude of training opportunities, you're able to get a badge that certifies that you are able to demonstrate certain skills that certification is testing for. That further completes their learner journey, and they're able to put that out on LinkedIn and get the visibility from recruiters and the job market specialists out there.
And ultimately, that is the issue. If we have no way to differentiate who knows what skills, we come up with certifications just to let people know. And it becomes the vehicle where essentially you give yourself a raise by getting a certification, even though you may resent the process a little bit. But do you think we're seeing an increase in salaries for DevOps professionals that have certifications?
Yes, from the research that we've seen, it certainly helps your promotions and really career growth within the area. But more importantly, we are trying to educate folks on the best practices. So ultimately, if we are able to get impact results from a business value that they're contributing to, whether it's saving cloud costs with the deployments, etc., that they're responsible for, or whether they're reducing developer toil with how long it takes to build their software, or identifying security vulnerabilities earlier in the process. Those kinds of impacts are also worth measuring as we roll out the certification. So in addition to being a job vehicle or a career vehicle, I think if we're able to also measure the business impacts, we're able to then quantify that even better.
We've also all met those old hands in this business who probably have forgotten more about DevOps than most of us will ever learn, or at least that's what they'll tell you. However, I would wonder or posit the theory that has the technology advanced so frequently and so fast as of late that even folks who are quote unquote old timers have something new to learn, and maybe they should be revisiting some of these programs. What do you think?
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of innovation in the DevOps field, at least in the last 4 or 5 years, and it continues to evolve. And part of that is the cloud providers and the environments around us are evolving. The integrations that folks need to think about are evolving. The security scanners are evolving. There are so many different aspects to be considered when you release software that there's best practices to be had very, very frequently. And so absolutely, I would consider this space as a learning journey. And the more folks can upskill, the more people can learn about these many different facets, I think the richer their own experience as a DevOps engineer will be.
What is that one thing that you see that students are unprepared for, or you wish they would spend more time thinking about before they signed up for the program? The thing that you constantly see, the mistake that people make over and over again?
So one of the things we've seen is just the basic understanding of software delivery concepts. Just simple things like, what are the differences between continuous deployment versus continuous delivery? How does release management within that software delivery lifecycle, how is that different from just deploying software? And is it more than just developers and DevOps engineers that play a part in this life cycle? The answer to that is yes, but we need folks to pay attention to those details, in addition to the more technical aspects of it, like if you're deploying to a Kubernetes environment, understanding Kubernetes basics, or if you're working with specific cloud providers, like if you're in an AWS environment or in a GCP environment, knowing the basics of those environments would be hugely helpful to all of these folks. And most of them do come in with that knowledge, but where we see challenges is when they're switching environments, and then upskilling in those areas does tend to be challenging for them.
All right. We hear a lot about automation and AI, and people start to wonder about whether or not there'll be a job for them when they're done finally with the training. So my question to you is, hey, would you tell your nephews, nieces, children that they should get a DevOps training and invest in that time and effort now? Because, will we still be talking about this 10 years from now?
Absolutely. I mean, I have a 13-year-old at home, and she's very, very interested in programming and so many different aspects of software and delivery in general. So what I'd say to everyone aspiring to be in this space is there is so much innovation there. So even with the advent of AI and ML, there is a lot of thinking and triaging that needs to happen, especially with all of the integrations and all of the problems really that our businesses are trying to solve. So focusing on the business value and really seeing, what is your end goal? Is your end goal going faster in terms of velocity, or is your end goal having more secure software? Is your end goal governance? of that software. There's so many business impacts that we need to solve for, that despite all of this innovation in AI and ML, if we can help our DevOps engineers hone in on those best practices and business problems, there's always room for learning. There's always room for innovation.
All right, folks, you heard it here first. Don't be embarrassed by what you don't know, and don't assume what you do know is still relevant. So there you have it. Diva, welcome. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
Coding is changing the world, making a difference in the world.
We take anyone, any adult, and help them become the best version of themselves and become a software engineer.
At Techstrong Group, we've undertaken to meet this challenge with our Engineering the Change Scholarship.
My career has completely changed to now being sought after by some of the biggest tech companies in the world.
Full $10,000 scholarship to one winner to attend the intense software development course at Boca Code.
I was just ready to be a software engineer.
So, Donald is another story.
Right now, it's kind of like, I don't know.
Honestly, it's starting to scare me a little bit.
Roller coaster of understanding something one moment and then feeling lost the next.
If you change the capitalization of a file name, you are going to your whole project.
At the end of it, you're gonna be a really good family.
We call Stephanie like the silent ninja.
As much as he's struggling, Donald really, really wants this.
My house burned down twice.
The biggest thing I'm struggling with definitely is time.
That's pretty cool that I've been able to expand my mind to be able to accept different ways of doing something.
My only option is to succeed.
Boca Code, we do it!
Highs, definitely getting started. Lows would be Darius jokes.
We told all of them that this is the hardest thing they would have to go through.
All of our graduates are absolute stars.
Boca Code!
Who will graduate and become a software engineer?
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some fantastic interviews that let us learn from a group of amazing industry experts. From our conference coverage to our first episode of Engineering the Change, we had some great content. We'll be back again on Monday, so we hope to see you then. And in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.